movie Moulin Rouge was about the nightlife in Paris's Montmartre district during the 1890s, the so-called Belle Époque. Today on Radio Free History, we continue our How Art Got Ugly series, as we take a deep dive into what was going on in Montmartre and how it produced the foundation of what we now call modern art. So this is episode 4 of our deep dive into how art got ugly. We started the first episode looking at Michelangelo and the Renaissance, when art was beautiful and transcendent for everybody. And by the end of our last episode, we're going to be looking at how a gigantic stainless steel balloon dog sells for $58 million.
Yeah, that's just talk about degeneration of a medium, like just holy.
Yeah. So our previous episode, we ended right after the Impressionists, and this episode we're going to go forward about 30 years to World War I.
That broke everybody's brain.
Yeah, it was a huge inflection point, not just in terms of art. 3 million young men blowing themselves up tends to change society in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's no getting around that. You kill a whole generation of people. And this was like the prevailing ideology at the time, at least in certain circles, was that our technology was going to create utopia. Mm-hmm. And then this technology created World War I. Yeah. So it was just a complete reversal of what they went for.
Well, it's funny you say that. That utopian thinking is going to cast its shadow on a lot of the art we're talking about.
Uh-oh.
But at least World War I was fought over a good reason, right? Wait, what was the reason why World War I was fought?
There were these two Slavic dudes, and one killed the other Slavic dude. I think it might have been a bar fight, but that's basically what started it. It was just, somebody got shot in Eastern Europe, and the whole world had to go to war.
So the moral of the story is, when two Slavs act stupid, just let it slide.
Yeah, you really don't want to go in there if you don't have to.
So, just like our previous art episodes, we're going to put the audio only throughout the usual channels, but I really recommend you watch this on YouTube because there's a visual component, and we're really going to be looking at how art changes over the span of 30 years from being something aesthetically pleasing to whatever the hell Picasso is.
Yeah, we have to be on guard for this kind of stuff, I think. At one point, the people who were Romans woke up and couldn't remember how to build aqueducts and roads. So I'm worried that is going to happen to us. So we're going to examine that process in this medium.
Yeah. Our first episode was the Renaissance. This is Botticelli, The Birth of Venus. I think everybody can see the beauty in this picture, right?
I know intuitively this is pretty.
Yeah.
This is just objectively a nice piece of art.
Then we went to this, Goya. Goya was a talented guy, but there's some weird stuff going on in this picture. Like, that guy is 10 feet tall, he's on his knees.
Early Simpsons season Smithers. A little bit. Not what I usually see from a Frenchman.
Yeah, this is, no, he's a Spanish guy. It's the French guys who were shooting him. This is a scene from the Napoleonic Wars. Then we went to this, Impressionism, where it was the technique of the painter mattered just as much as the subject matter, but it still looks nice. It's just a little different. It's not Michelangelo, but,
Reality, if you squint, makes you think for a second. Right? So you can tell there's talent here. You can tell we're working towards some kind of aesthetic prettiness.
Yep. This is what we're going over today. At least Vincent Van Gogh will play part of a role in it.
This isn't Doctor Who.
Well,
it's usually some like nerdy girl with this, Doctor Who merch covered in this. That's not the context, is it?
Well, look, I'm not going to say that there's no aesthetic quality in this painting, but compare this to the Sistine Chapel. Why do we see this painting as brilliant? Like, try to explain to an alien who just came here from Jupiter why we view this painting as beautiful, why we consider this as a seminal work of art on the same level as The Birth of Venus or the Sistine Chapel. it's
Aliens would not like us.
yeah.
I got a feeling that there's very good reasons why they don't talk to us. I wouldn't talk to us.
I don't just think it's our art. I think, you know, our geopolitics. This is where our next episode is going. Jackson Pollock.
This is not. This is not nice. This is
No.
not pretty. This looks like the canvas that you put down so you don't make a mess while you're making art.
Well, in the middle of the 20th century, Jackson Pollock was basically thought of as the new Michelangelo, the genius of the art world. Either I'm missing something, or else people in the 50s were in a very altered state, probably involving some sort of narcotics.
Yeah, they had some fun in the 50s.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Just one of the things we keep coming back to is just what is art? Because to me, this just doesn't even seem like the same activity as The Birth of Venus, making that painting versus making this one.
Yeah, this just doesn't fit in the same. There's no tent big enough to house this and the truly beautiful stuff that we've shown you.
So, in the next episode, that's when we will finally pull back the curtain and say how this monstrosity became known as a seminal piece of art. It's called Lavender Mist.
Jesus, that sounds like a terrible porno.
Yeah, or a stripper's name, right?
A stripper's name or some, maybe like a terrible band.
But, you know, it's one thing to say that people went crazy in the 40s and 50s and said this was aesthetically pleasing, but we have to tell the whole story, and it's going to take us at least one more episode to get there.
Yeah, this is a long story, but we're going to very thoroughly explain how this happened.
Yeah. So as I said, the most famous artist of the 20th century is almost certainly Pablo Picasso. Like, if you were to ask somebody who's the most famous artist of the 20th century, it's not a long list of names you're going to get, like Picasso, maybe Andy Warhol.
Fucking Banksy.
Banksy's 21st century.
Is he? I'm sure he was doing something in the 90s. How old is that kid? Do we know?
I'm sure he was doing drugs in the 90s.
Exactly. Yeah. Probably some old man.
So, yeah, who, if you were to ask the black turtleneck crowd who's the most famous artist of the 20th century, they'd say maybe Picasso, maybe Warhol, Salvador Dali, Jackson Pollock. It's not a huge list.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that any of those people are in the pantheon of great visual artists or visual painters or sculptors. Maybe that's just me.
Doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
There's some generational decay in terms of product.
Yeah. I'm not going to say it doesn't take any talent to do this. I'm not a good drawer. I probably couldn't do any of these paintings, but like, no, this is something that a talented 14-year-old can do.
Yeah. It's a very troubled 14. It's the kind of art where, like, if I saw a homeless guy trying to sell this, I'd like walk across the street.
Yeah.
Like a sus homeless guy is the guy who's going to be trying to sell this stuff. So.
Yeah, the kind of guy who says he's hungry, and then when you offer to buy him a meal, says, "No, you just give me the money instead."
I gotta bring bus tickets. Now in Toronto, it's always $20 they want. They're gonna give you a long story, but they're always gonna come down to I need $20, and that is because $20 is the price of a hit of whatever their choice illicit substances.
Really that low, eh?
Yeah, it's inflation is not. I guess it's like they just add more baking soda. I guess there's room for
shrinkflation.
Just shrinkflation. And nobody talks about the poor crackhead and how that affects him, and her. But
so to answer the question of why Picasso is the most famous artist of the 20th century, we have to ask another question. And that question is when. Because Picasso gets famous in the 1920s, and he is a high society celebrity in the 20s. Like, he is as famous as Tom Cruise was in the 80s. Everybody in London and Paris wants to name drop the guy or say, I had a cocktail party and Pablo Picasso showed up. It seems kind of silly now, but every wannabe would love to say, yeah, Tom Cruise showed up at my party.
Yeah, people love celebrity, right?
Yeah. Well, arguably, Pablo Picasso was one of the first celebrities because there just was no broadcast media before he was famous. Some of these artists were well known within very small and exclusive circles, but it really takes technology to get a message out before somebody can really be classified as what we now call a celebrity.
Yeah, it makes sense. And sometimes when that happens, things kind of freeze.
Yeah.
So sometimes you see things are just the stamp is like, the origins are just indelibly labeled on the.
Well, that's actually kind of the point I'm trying to make because, in the year 2002, if we've been doing this, couldn't do a podcast in 2002, but if I had made the comparison of Picasso and Tom Cruise in 2002, it'd be like, okay, that makes sense. Here's the thing. In 2025, 23 years after that, Tom Cruise is still the most apt analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Cruise is still probably the most famous name in Hollywood.
Yeah. Who else? He's really
who's
gotten famous since it's Will Smith.
Yeah, Will Smith, Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, but again, it's not a huge list. And even those people, I wouldn't say they were as famous as Tom Cruise was.
Yeah.
The
last movie stuff.
Yeah.
Was wackadoo freaking religion.
Yeah, exactly. In the 80s, you had Tom Cruise and Schwarzenegger, and you had movies like Star Wars and Back to the Future, which just became cultural touchstones. But as we move forward, like I said, in the 90s, you still have your A-listers, but they're not Tom Cruise, right?
Yeah, nobody reaches those heights. It's like,
yep. And then move even forward into the 2000s. Heath Ledger, Kate Blanchett, Jennifer Lawrence, Christian Bale. Again, they're well-known people. I'm sure they've made millions of dollars off their movies. But are they Tom Cruise? Christian Bale is no Tom Cruise.
However erratic his behavior might be, he's not filling those shoes. Those tiny little shoes.
Yeah, so that's the 2000s. Now it's the 2020s. I have no fucking idea what movies are coming out. I have no idea who the stars of these movies coming out are.
I'm going to wait for Netflix to tell me.
Even on Netflix, I don't know who the fuck these people are.
It's like, you got to get a wife. This is on Netflix. Come watch this. And then you go and watch it. That's how you experience it. And no more going to the friggin', movie house.
Yeah. Well, again, the last movie theater I went to was I went with my boomer parents to go watch Top Gun 2.
Wow.
Which
that's fitting. That's a good place to leave it. That's a good.
But it's not that there's no media coming out. Like as you said, Netflix is churning out all sorts of shit. But there's almost too much of it. No piece of media on Netflix is ever going to be as famous as Back to the Future was in 1985.
Well, it's like you told me. It was like everybody was really impressed with Breaking Bad's numbers.
Yeah. And
Breaking Bad's numbers was well below what reruns of the Golden Girls had gotten in the 90s. People weren't there. The audience wasn't there anymore.
Yeah. This just got me to thinking though, there's more than one comparison, more than one parallel between Tom Cruise in the 80s and Picasso in the 20s. In 2025, 40 years later, Tom Cruise is still arguably the most famous actor out there. In 1960, 40 years after Picasso got famous, he was the most famous artist still. And Picasso wasn't doing anything noteworthy in the 50s. I mean, he was still he was almost a parody of himself in the 50s. He was intentionally doing weird, whacked out, drugged out shit in the 50s. In the 60s, he liked his women.
Yeah, these artists are generally not chaste individuals in my experience.
Yeah.
Especially they get famous, they go a little hog wild sometimes.
Tom Cruise had his heyday in the 80s. He had maybe a 10-year period after that where actors could still get famous, though not to the same level. 10 years after Picasso, you had people like Salvador Dali. You had paintings like American Gothic. They're still famous, but they're not Picasso. And then after that, it's just weak sauce. It's Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, can see a half-life here.
So, if I can make one message clear with this episode, it's that Picasso is a product of the 20s just as much as Tom Cruise is a product of the 80s.
Okay.
Like, if Tom Cruise had gotten famous in the 70s or in the 90s, he might still be a celebrity, but he wouldn't be Tom Cruise. He wouldn't be Mr. Adrenaline Junkie Scientologist Tom Cruise, the icon.
He'd be out of context.
So, from our current vantage point in the year 2025, we now have enough distance to compare the art world of the early 20th century kind of with Hollywood in the late 20th century. Like, visual art was the cultural touchstone of the broader culture in the 20s, just like cinema was a cultural touchstone of the broader culture in the 80s. But, you know, that was the high watermark. It disappears afterwards. And why does it disappear? Art gets a lot easier to make after the 20s. Like, in the 19th century, paint was expensive and hard to make, and you had to mix this shit yourself. From the 30s and 40s onwards, you could go to the paint shop with the stoner selling the pigments, didn't matter what city you lived in, and anybody having a midlife crisis could buy some pigment and paint something.
Draw some upsetting stuff. Try and argue that it's just as brilliant as this kind of upsetting stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, just art got easier to make. There was more of it, but the cultural impact of any given artist was dampened. Just as from the 2000s onwards, you have cable, you have satellite TV, you have YouTube, you have streaming services, you have more content. I mean, we're putting out content here. We're not going to be as famous as Tom Cruise in the 80s.
Oh God. I don't think I could tolerate enough drugs to be famous in the 80s. I don't want to be 80s famous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're not even going to be Harvey Weinstein famous.
No, thank God. Keep my anonymity.
Yeah. Well,
anonymity.
But I think the most important thing I'm trying to get at, though, is just kind of everything after the 20s, or at least everything after the 30s, is just kind of a LARP of this shit, or of like Dada or Surrealism, which we'll get to talking about later, or some sort of social commentary that you want to say is deep. It's the same thing. Everything after the 90s is a LARP. You know, every cartoon looks like Pixar or Adult Swim. Every sitcom is a knockoff of Seinfeld and Friends. Every teen movie is American Pie, which itself is a knockoff of Porky's. Like, there's no new genres of music after about emo.
Yeah, things just stagnated.
Yeah, you know, like how many sequels and remakes and adaptations of old TV shows and especially comic book movies. There's no new ideas coming out. We're just wringing everything dry.
Yeah, it's all like feeding on itself. The point where the maggots are feeding on the host.
But I think the biggest change is what I said earlier. It's just the change in technology. Like I said, after the 20s, broadcast technology becomes dominant, and after the 90s, the internet becomes dominant. And there's no amount of creativity that's going to change living in a different technological world. You know, like I said, you can have more art, but it's a lot harder to impress the wider culture. You know, if you were an artist in the mid-20th century, even if you were a really talented painter, you still had to get Time Magazine or Studs Terkel or the New Yorker to write up articles about you, talking about how you were a genius.
Yeah, we're gatekeepers.
Yeah, exactly. And then just from the 90s onwards, same thing. We consume media from a very, very different landscape.
So, yeah, bro.
Movies and TV are just a boomer medium, just like it or not, they're a boomer medium. Nobody gets their news from CNN, and nobody gets their movies from a movie theater. And
I'm ashamed to admit this, but today I got a news update from Philip DeFranco. I clicked on a Philip DeFranco video. Oh, what does he have to say about the news. He's going to sum up
Yeah. And even
I
then,
did that.
Philip DeFranco was from like 12 years ago.
Yes.
I didn't even know he was still around.
He's old. He's doing the news now. He just gives you a daily update on the news.
But yeah, so just as the boomer media was film and TV, kind of the lost generation, their medium is this visual art, and afterwards, society just consumes culture in a different way.
What a tribute. So this is a snapshot of art as it existed at this weird period when technology changed.
Yeah, and that's just, you know, that's the reason that Picasso has this, you know, almost mythical status in our culture. And there's a lot of very talented artists. In fact, there's a lot of artists who I think are probably better than this stuff we have on the screen right now. They are never going to have the fame of Picasso. It's just not the same world we live in.
Too many pigs at the trough.
This is where we remind you to, if you like what we're doing, like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to donate us a little bit, make it a little easier for us to research and produce this content, toss us a bit of money on ko-fi.com. It's ko-fi/Radio Free History, or subscribestar.com/radio-free-history. If you donate to one of our higher tiers, we got some nice merch to send you.
You're going to love the merch. We're going to promise you the merch will be on Fruit of the Loom stuff, not Gildan stuff. So that's the better t-shirt.
So we last left off in 1886 with this painting, Sunday afternoon on the Isle of La Grande Shot. It was, yes, it's the movie, I'm sorry, it's the painting prominently featured in that movie where Ferris Bueller's spoiled rich friend decides it's deep to stare at this painting and realize the kid doesn't actually have a face. It's, you know, about a rich kid whose dad doesn't give him enough attention, so he decides to take the car out joyriding, and Ferris Bueller, who wants sympathy because his sister got a car and he just got a computer.
Computers were freaking expensive back then. He's trying to give his son the benefit of this new technology. This is what he gets. He gets his hooliganism. It's probably why the Generation X is so messed up. One of the reasons.
That and the drugs. Well, at least their drugs were pure in Gen X. They
much less adulteration. Fewer going through fewer hands.
So, like I said, we last left off at this painting here. It was a centerpiece at the final exhibition of the Impressionists. If you don't know what I'm talking about, like, we're 4 episodes in. Sorry, guys, you're going to have to go back and listen to the old stuff. But the Impressionists, they had 8 shows between 1874 and 1886. And this piece made the big splash at the last Impressionist show. But the thing is, it's not really an Impressionist painting. It's done by a guy named Georges Seurat, a guy who we don't know very much about because he dies young and he lives a very private life and he's autistic as fuck.
Oh, I know what that means.
This is still the Industrial Revolution, where every year there's new paints and new dyes and new pigments and new colors that come out. And as a result, this guy decides that, hey, I'm going to use scientific theories to produce the best painting. And what he does is he spends all his time in his little laboratory saying, okay, if I put a red dot next to a green dot next to another red dot, it makes the red look brighter. So this painting is a bunch of little tiny dots that he thinks he's doing scientifically. He basically drives himself crazy doing this gigantic painting. Afterwards, he does a bunch of much smaller paintings using the same pointillist style. But like I said, when he's 31, he drops dead of, I don't know what he drops dead of, but he doesn't live very long. We don't know enough about the guy. We just know he's autistic.
I'm gonna guess amphetamines. If you're asking me like what's gonna make a guy try and figure out like the science of dots to the point where this happens, I'm gonna guess amphetamine. But I would go along with he's shy, he's an artist, he's awkward, he's very private. It might have been some less accepting people around him, but given the cultural mores of the time, and he might have turned to speed or whatever the hell they had back then.
Well, I'm just saying, the point I'm trying to make is that you think of the Impressionists, you think of a guy in a beret setting up his easel, taking out his tubes of paints, doing something that's maybe not completely detailed, but, shows a nice little landscape or a sunny scene in Gay Paris in the 19th century. But that's not this guy. This guy's Rain Man. I want to put a red dot here and then a blue dot here.
That level of focus is terrifying.
Yeah. And like I said, Ferris Bueller's friend stares at it and says, these people don't actually have faces, just like my daddy doesn't pay me attention.
I'm sure that resonates very deeply with a generation that I was not a part of. But
why is this the last Impressionist show in 1886? Well, the reason is that after 10 to 12 years of creative energy in the Impressionist movement, creative people are restless. They just move on to other things. Like Renoir, he actually moves back in a more classical direction, starts painting more traditional paintings. Degas was the guy who did all the paintings of the ballet dancers in the studio, which, let's not make too many assumptions about his motivations there. Dirty French creatives who want to spend time in ballet studios, just...
At least he wasn't painting prostitutes. They all paint prostitutes.
Oh, no, I'm sure he did. Ballet dancers, what do you think they were? What do you think their side hustle was?
It's the dance, it's generally, the show business, it's the dark side.
Yeah, Degas just decides to essentially retire from painting altogether when the Impressionists disband. Impressionism, they had a good run at it. They sold some paintings in America, which is what we talked about last time as well. They've done it for 10 years. It's starting to feel passé, so they're moving on to other things. It's not like, it's not like some rock band where everybody's suing everybody else and everybody's overdosing on drugs. It's just Impressionism's finished at this point. Not for any nefarious reasons. It's just we're moving on to other things.
Played out.
It's played out, and this painting here is many things, but it is not an Impressionist painting.
Interesting.
Now, at this point, every art history professor introduces Vincent van Gogh. It's almost a cliche. He is this tortured artist without much formal training. He comes to Paris in 1886, right around the time of this show. He gets inspired by this less realistic but more conceptual style, and by these new painting techniques, and by the new vibrant colors that are available that weren't available before. He spends a couple of years honing his craft, and his paintings go from being like the one on the left, more traditional, to the one on the right, where you can clearly see the different divisions, the different colors next to each other. He crossed paths with a few other famous artists like Toulouse-lautrec and Gauguin. He moves to the south of France, goes crazy, cuts his ear off, kills himself in obscurity, and then becomes super famous after he's dead. Here's the thing about that story, it's bullshit. So, we like to talk about how he makes all these ingenious works in the 4 years between 1886 when he sees that painting and 1890 when he offs himself. But let's look at some of the things written in the 1890s in actual high-class cultured publications. Let's see what they thought of the art world. This is in Le Revue des Deux Mondes, or the Review of Two Worlds. Yeah, if you speak French, A, I've got a raspy voice right now, I'm getting over a cold. B, I don't speak that language. So deal with it.
We don't speak French here. Especially not in Quebec. God.
So, this is in Revue des Deux Mondes. One of the oldest and most prestigious magazines in France in 1895 says that the names of Meissonier, Bouguereau, and Gérôme have become synonymous with academic excellence in France. Their works, prized by amateurs and institutions, still define the dominant taste of our time. Now, I've watched a lot of Jeopardy growing up. I never heard the names Meissonier, Bouguereau, and Gérôme.
Well, it doesn't ring a bell for me either.
You hear names like Monet and Manet and Van Gogh and Gauguin and Picasso and Matisse and all these people, yet you read the publications from the time. Who the fuck are these artists?
The fuck?
From L'Artiste in July 1895. If one were to name the masters of our century, one would have to mention Meissonier for precision, Bouguereau for grace, and Gérôme for exoticism. These three names still dominate sales and exhibitions. So, okay, maybe they're just known in France. There's a lot of art that is known regionally that doesn't go internationally.
Like the Tragically Hip.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad comparison. For you Americans listening, ask your friend from Buffalo who the Tragically Hip were.
He'll know. He'll enlighten you.
In Le Journal des Arts in 1896, in December 12th, 1896, the paintings of Meissonier, Bouguereau, and Gérôme are among the most sought after across the Atlantic. Their style, though criticized by some modernists, remains a guarantee of quality for collectors. So apparently these artists who I've never heard of are known on both sides of the Atlantic. Again, I'm feeling like I'm being lied to here by saying this Van Gogh guy is the most influential artist of the time. And this is like from 5 or 6 years after Van Gogh's dead.
Jesus.
April 1897, La Gazette des Beaux-Arts. Meissonier, Bouguereau, and Gérôme, despite the assaults of the new schools, remain the pillars of French art. Their influence extends far beyond our borders, and their works still continue to be studied. Again, I'm not hearing the names of like David, Delacroix, Courbet, Monet, Manet, the guys we looked at last time. Even the Impressionists, I'm not seeing their names here.
Very strange.
I call it the Jeopardy list, the list of artists you need to know if you're ever fortunate enough to get cast on Jeopardy. None of the artists I'm hearing about here are on that list. And I get that tastes change, but why do we talk about Van Gogh as if he was like the most important when he was already dead? This is like some 1984 bullshit where we're erasing history and putting new names in.
Yeah. It's poor unpersoned artists.
So let's look at some of the art by these three artists we just mentioned.
Wow.
Yeah, this is Bouguereau, Virgil and Dante in Hell. This is what I expect when I think of art.
We should have used this as a thumbnail for the wrestling episode.
Yeah, we still can. Actually, if you want to talk about how art degenerates, we'll be looking at a painting that's a lot less photorealistic than this, about Jacob wrestling the angel later, so prepare to be disappointed.
Aww.
So yeah, this is called Virgil and Dante in Hell. So obviously it's from the it's from the Divine Comedy. It's from Dante's Inferno. It's a classical painting of a subject from literature. That's what I think of when I think of art. Nothing unexpected there. Let's look at the next guy. Meissonier, the Battle of Friedland. Napoleon commemorating one of his victories on the battlefield.
This looks good.
Yeah, this looks great, and there's nothing unexpected about the style here.
Yeah.
This isn't like weird Picasso shit. It's not even weird Van Gogh shit.
This is still quality, what I would call quality art. Like.
And the third guy, Gérôme.
Oh, wow. That's stunning.
Yeah. In fact, I think the movie Gladiator was, at least a couple of the scenes were...
Looks it.
Yeah, were inspired by this painting. You see the Vestal Virgins giving him thumbs down, so
What a rowdy
somebody's
group.
about to die.
The Vestal Virgins, man. Cold ladies.
So, What am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that if we're talking about how the whole art world changes because of these visionary modern artists who decide to do things in a new way and have a new vision for the world, that's just not true when you look at the historical record. At the time, people still wanted to buy this stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, I still think this should be what we consider art.
I'd rather put my money into this.
Yeah. So what's going on here? Well, there are two terms that you might have picked up on in those quotations: academic and modernist. These paintings are academic, precise technique, subject matter from history, literature, the Bible, or mythology. But more importantly, they're sold through something called the salon. What is the salon? An official panel of academicians. They would decide whose paintings and sculptures got to be displayed in the salon for rich people to buy. And if you got accepted into the salon, you would maybe get some state or some church commission, and then you'd be admitted into the academy yourself, and then your apprentices would have a very good shot at getting into the salons, and the cycle would repeat. I'm sure there was also some fellatio in there, but
goes without saying.
It's just part of the circle of art. It's the samsara of art.
I'm just noticing. Don't blame me.
It's not just a visual art, it's every creative endeavor.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. What can you do? Creative people.
These are the academics. They're the people who made the art like this. Then there was the other group, the modernists. These are the Vincent van Goghs. They're doing something different. It's kind of hard to put it into words what they're doing, but Van Gogh's Starry Night is not the same activity that this guy is doing, that Jerome is doing in this gladiator painting here. Oh yeah, I forgot to say the name of this painting. It's Pollice Verso, or With a Turned Thumb.
Nice.
So
poignant.
You know, if I had this painting hanging over my fireplace, it would certainly send a message to people.
Yeah.
Not sure what message, but it would send a message.
You want to know what painting is over Vince McMahon's fireplace?
What?
He has a picture of himself with muscles like exposed, riding a motorcycle. Like a huge painting of himself with bare arms, looking ripped, riding a motorcycle.
No.
It's just...
Like, after Einstein died, they wanted to analyze his brain. They wanted to dissect his brain to see if it was wired differently. We need to do the same with Vince after he dies.
I'm going to be very interested to see that autopsy. That's going to be a fascinating autopsy report.
So, when we talk about art, at least in this era, we're talking about Paris specifically. Now, why are we talking about Paris? Well, since the reign of Louis XIV, which was like the late 1600s, Paris was where every creative on the continent would flock to if he had any talent. Now,
the Hollywood of its day.
Yeah,
Well,
or maybe more like the New York.
Oh, okay.
Like, again, I'm almost 40. I'm old enough to remember the propaganda from the 90s when, every TV show was set in New York, and they said, go come to New York and you'll be part of the world's cultural milieu, sitting around a coffee shop. Or, I mean, even, he said Hollywood. I mean, even the 80s was, they were thumping California, like Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh, it was like bi-coastal finish.
Yeah. Yeah. Even then, it was probably more perception than reality. New York was important. It probably just wasn't singularly important in the 80s and 90s. But pre-internet, you still had to move to the city, get in with the network of gallery owners or music producers or movie studios or whoever you wanted to get in with. You could be a really talented filmmaker, but Harvey Weinstein and his friends with similar last names would control the distribution rights.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you needed to be in the good graces of Harvey Weinstein, as we discovered a few years ago. So I guess I'm talking about the creative careers here, though. And I mean, if anybody who works in a creative career just knows how much the internet has changed the game. Like, you no longer have to live in the city. You put your portfolio on a WordPress website. It costs you $8 a month. If you're a filmmaker, you can just put your portfolio on YouTube, or you can host your movie behind a firewall.
Or go to one of a million streaming services.
Exactly. You're a musician, you go on Spotify, right?
You need to be on Spotify.
Yeah.
Or I won't listen to you.
Yeah. Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is just if you're below a certain age, it's kind of hard to appreciate just how much of a cultural choke point certain cities used to be.
Yeah, these were,
Even in my adult life, though I'm getting old now, I'm not super old, I'm still in my 30s, but I still remember in my adult life, you needed to come to Toronto or New York or Chicago or Miami or LA. Just otherwise, you just weren't networking with the right people.
Yep. Even if you came to those cities, you ended up not networking with the right people. So
Yeah.
those people want nothing to do with you because you didn't go to summer camp with them.
Yeah.
So you paid a bunch of rent.
Yeah.
Wow, and you met some freaking degenerates.
And this is why, every starving actor thought it was better to be in the ensemble of some off Broadway musical in New York than in some community theater production in Yuma, Arizona.
Because producers do not live in Yuma, Arizona. Nor do casting directors. Although now maybe they do. Who knows? Anybody with a cell phone is a freaking publisher now. Like, I'm a testament to that. God.
Yeah, you're right that the producers lived in New York, but I also don't want to tell the more delicate members of our audience what you had to do to the producers to get out of the ensemble.
That's been a long, the casting couch and again, when Weinstein's scandal broke, I was like, what? We didn't. I thought everyone knew. I didn't know people didn't know that. That was honestly. Yeah. That was my takeaway when that broke. It was like when Dog the Bounty Hunter or Hulk Hogan got caught saying the N-word, and everyone was like, "Can you believe it?" I was like, "Yes."
Yeah, look at him.
Of course, I would assume that they said that. Like, what? Anyway.
Yeah. So, what point am I trying to make here? I'm trying to say that in the 1890s, in the 1900s, 1910s, the equivalent of New York City for musical theater was Paris for painting.
Okay.
London certainly had its art for the British Empire. We went over that a couple episodes ago, and there were a handful of other cities like Berlin, St. Petersburg, Milan, Rome, Moscow, Vienna, Munich, where you had a shot of being culturally relevant, but that list drops off really fast. What was the art scene in Paris in the 1890s? Well, like I said, you had your salons, the academic artists. But you also had a little neighborhood called Montmartre. And what was Montmartre?
La vie.
Yep, that's exactly. Yeah, it was centered on Moulin Rouge. Opened in 1889. And one of the most famous landmarks. I think it's still open today.
Yeah, it's still, as of my trip to Paris, that was a while ago, but it was open.
Yeah, so just like Montmartre in the 1880s, 1890s, that's the equivalent of Williamsburg in Brooklyn at the height of the hipster era in the 2000s.
It's where the kids with the rich parents move.
Yeah, exactly. But it's exactly where it is. The trust fund bohemians, the trustafarians, as we used to call them, because a lot of them had dreadlocks.
Yeah, you'll never meet a more insufferable group of people than rich kids pretending to be poor kids. It's just, they're challenging to work with.
So, continuing the analogy with New York City in the 90s, if you wanted to be a ballet dancer, the gold standard was like the New York City Ballet in Manhattan, or maybe the American Ballet Theater, or the Rockettes. If you got in there, especially if you were a principal dancer, you were part of high society, or whether or not you made it by talent, it didn't really matter. Sometimes you got there by talent, sometimes you got there by your sparkling personality, sometimes you got there other ways.
There's always somebody just as talented as you who will compromise morally to get a part. It's just the reality of being very fungible. There's going to be 10, 15 people that are dying to do the job, and some of them are not going to have the strictest, most puritanical compass in terms of their...
They're going to prove they want it.
Yep. They're going to prove to the producer that they're going to do whatever they need to do to get that part.
They're going to prove they want it more than you, but there's also going to be 10 people who want it more than them.
Yep. Yep. That's when you end up with a Vince McMahon. Dropping deuces on these chicks, Jesus.
So, if you couldn't make it in the New York Ballet and you had hustle, you could move to Brooklyn, you could start a dance company, you could dress like you're cosplaying the movie Fame or Rent or something.
And they do.
Yeah. You'd usually catch herpes or gonorrhea, and you could at least pay the rent on a shitty loft apartment. Like,
Not anymore.
I'm talking in the 90s. I
Oh,
am
in the
very
90s,
specifically talking in the 90s.
And for a very brief period in the 2000s, early 2000s.
Or the late 2000s.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, you could at least make a go of it if that's what you wanted to do in those days. At least until you got priced out, or you fucked up your knees, or you got pregnant and had to go back to small town Indiana. Whatever. My point is, there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of people who want to make it as creatives in New York, and not a lot of slots.
I was always reminded of like the salmon coming. Like you had all these you know, like you had all these predators just waiting on the banks of the freaking rivers. That's Toronto. I can only imagine fucking, you know, a true cultural hub back in the day. Jesus.
Yeah, no, yeah, you could be the hip-hop dancer dancing at a bar mitzvah and make decent money, but there was only one New York City ballet. Like, a lot of dancers in New York, a lot of them who you might even call working dancers, a lot of them who could pay the rent, but, you know, if you wanted to dance in the ballet, you really had to prove you wanted it.
These freaking measure kids. Yeah. Like, yeah, this one's good. No, this one's not.
Apparently, like, the women stopped menstruating because they starved themselves so much.
I believe it. Just to the point where in some of these companies they had to like do weigh-ins every week to make sure nobody was freaking dying. Like dancers were.
Did they care if somebody died?
Well, because it's a liability. That's why they cared. Like,
it's New York. It's like,
well, all these kids have rich parents who can sue. That's the one. You know. Like all these rich people have dipstick kings. Because remember, like if you have any chance of dancing at that level, have been in like very expensive dance classes from when you were a child.
Yeah. Your soul has been broken.
And for some, you know, they get some smoking Eastern European to freaking, you know, take, you know, whatever, like the Simpsons.
Put cigarettes on
Good practice. Here is cat back, like that kind of shit. Like. And you're there, and if they die, then the parents with deep pockets can come after you. So that's the problem. If it was just like in pro wrestling, that's usually not a problem. Like you send Cletus a ham.
Look, Vladislav, I'm sponsoring your green card.
I swear that you have skills that no American has.
So, what point am I trying to make? The point I'm trying to make is that, yes, you could have been a dancer in Brooklyn, but there's no prestige being a Brooklyn dancer. You know, there's money to pay the rent, especially if you have hustle, but there's no prestige. And that's the same thing. The academic art, the guys making the paintings of the gladiator, they had the prestige at the salons in Paris. The Vincent van Goghs across town, they might have been having a little more fun, but they were the equivalent of the bar mitzvah dancer in Brooklyn.
Jeez.
So I don't want to poo-poo it too much because, you know, it was still a good place for creatives to meet and collaborate, and you still got some interesting, if weird shit coming out of Montmartre.
Now they have to do it on the internet.
Well, like I said, that's what I'm saying. If you're under the age of 30, I don't think you'll ever appreciate just how much the city used to be the place you had to come for this stuff. Not anymore.
No, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Not in their world.
Music, it's the same thing. In Manhattan, you have the symphony, you have Carnegie Hall. The gold standard is being able to play a show at Madison Square Garden. In Brooklyn, you have the guy with the acoustic guitar singing about the slutty girl he picked up at the bar. Or being melancholy about having to live in a world full of idiots.
Having the HIV. I put a needle in my arm and I did myself harm.
What was that song about the hipster girl? We got Slurpees, I got herpes. Yeah, so again, you have the prestige musicians in Manhattan, you have the guys with the acoustic guitar in Brooklyn, same thing. You've got your salon artists in Paris, you got your crazy people in Montmartre. You have the creative institutions that everybody knows about, that all of the publications are writing about, and then you have essentially the scene kids. You know, you were never going to get status as the scene kids, but importantly though, if you had hustle, you could do something.
I just realized something.
Yeah.
The scene kids of the early MySpace era are going to be the, the flashpoint of the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
You think about all the shit that, oh God, that's not great. Dealing with that cultural legacy.
Yeah, I just imagine an anthropologist in 100 years digging up Lacey Green videos.
Oh wow, Lacey Green, or like whatever, the one where the dad freaked out about.
Or even The Amazing Atheist.
Oh wow, I'm scared to just look at his channel now. I don't know what he's doing these days. I heard some very disturbing things.
The other main difference between the prestige art and the salons versus the avant-garde stuff in Montmartre, even though the word avant-garde wasn't really used back then, is in Montmartre, it was as much about whether you had hustle as your talent. Like, you could be the most talented artist in the world if you couldn't network, if you couldn't at least sell your stuff. What difference did it make? You had to tap into your trust fund a little more. Since about the 1840s, the Industrial Revolution had created enough of a middle class that like painting and sculpture wasn't just done for royalty and nobility in the church anymore. There was now a nouveau riche class. And if you remember last time we talked about Gustave Courbet, the realists, he was the guy who painted the peasants doing manual labor. He was the first guy to really self-promote, because he would find the other bourgeois people and say, hey, do you want my paintings of peasants doing manual labor?
The dignity of labor.
Well, exactly. He was a proto-communist. He was contemporaneous with Karl Marx. I don't think he was aware of Karl Marx, but he still hung around the radical circles who talked about injustice and property is theft.
Oh, God.
And after the Franco-Prussian War, he's part of the Paris Commune, which tries to seize power and take over the city, and is promptly put down by the army.
Yeah,
He tries to destroy the Vendôme column, which is made by like melted down cannons from all of Napoleon's victories. He says, this is a symbol of colonialism, and they say, and when the army rolls in, they say, buddy, you're paying for this. He's like, oh, fuck. He has to spend the rest of his life in Switzerland because he can't pay off the debt. So,
very fresh solution.
Yeah. So this guy essentially becomes the template of the Bohemian from the 1840s onward, talking about injustice caused by the new bourgeois class. But who the fuck do you think he's selling to?
Yeah. Self-hate is what sells.
Yes. Not just him, but his clientele.
Yeah.
Yeah, who do you think he's selling to? Who do you think he's inviting to his independent exhibitions?
You people make me sick. Buy my paintings. Well, it's like now, right? You get a lot of capitalists, anti-capitalist crusaders with their expensive gadgets and forget.
Yeah. Well, I just say, like, for better or for worse, as much hypocrisy as you want to say there is or isn't, it's just not possible to be an independent artist with hustle until there's a middle class. And if there's enough people to afford your shit, there's got to be bougie people.
Yeah, you gotta be.
And again, this is why until very, very recently, when the internet changes the game, artists still love to bitch about the bourgeoisie, but they never seem to move out to an agricultural community. They always seem to live like a few blocks over from the penthouse apartments where their clientele want to put their avant-garde art in their living room. There's very few painters who go out and live with the Amish if they appreciate the simple life. They're all just going through the motions that Courbet went through in the 1840s, and by the 1880s, There's now a whole neighborhood full of these fuckers.
Jesus
That's
Christ.
what Montmartre is. And again, whether it's Jackson Pollock in the 1940s making his Lavender Mist, or whether it's Vice magazine in Brooklyn in 2004, everything is derivative of these people. Everything. For proof of that, you know the joke about the modern artist submitting a blank sheet and saying it represents the emptiness of life, like the stereotype of just the artist who's trying to see what he can get away with? This is 1883.
Wow.
Now, to be clear, the guy who did this was intentionally doing it as a joke. His name is Alphonse Allais. He submitted this to an intentionally humorous exhibition. It's called Première Communion des Jeunes Filles Chloritiques par un temps de neige, or First Communion of Anemic Young Girls in the Snow. He's just being funny doing this. Now, like, just to put things into proper context, in the 1880s, you have a bunch of these humorous exhibitions. Some of them are visited by like 2,000 people in Montmartre. And and again, these aren't creatives going to it. It's the bourgeois people going to it because they want to feel cultured. One of them is the Salon of the Incoherents, or Le Salon des Incohérents, or however the fuck you pronounce that. In the 1880s, this is a new idea. If you're in Paris in 1883, you go, you have a few laughs about this is what modern art is. That's that. You know, I had my hipster days in my 20s. I was 24 once. I went to an Alice in Wonderland themed exhibition at an independent art gallery. It's like the early 2010s, so it's novel at the time to go to an art gallery with black lights and a bunch of Alice in Wonderland paintings about gender-swapped characters. Seems so quaint now. It makes me cringe to think about it, but I mean, there was novelty of walking up to a girl who had sleeve tattoos.
Yeah, it was new to us.
It was new. Yeah. Well, this like white canvas stuff was new in the 1880s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you were to have that same exhibition now, like, well, if you were to have the same Alice in Wonderland exhibition now, it would just be an aging millennial fest.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you'd die of cringe as soon as you saw the first handlebar mustache.
Oh, God. Queen West. Shout out to Queen West.
So why am I bringing this up? Just to show it just how completely unoriginal all the boundary pushing art is. This is the 1880s. In 1883, Montmartre, the vibe is right for a few middle-class cultured people to go have a few laughs at an all-white painting. Every shocking piece of modern art since then requires you to have context. It's just a LARP.
Yeah.
It's a LARP of this shit. Like the 1910s, you have the Dada movement. In the 60s, you have Monty Python. They're all just repeating this. Like we seem to be caught in a loop over and over again of people trying to send a message with their crazy art. No, it's like in the 1880s, they knew this was a joke.
People were smarter back then.
But, you know, you're never going to get the same vibe of the 1880s because in the 1880s, the middle class is still a new concept. Like, again, it's still the age of industrialization. Like you were talking about optimism over the technology that eventually led to World War I. In the 1880s, just the concept of a middle class was quaint. You mean you're not rich and not poor, but you have enough money to enjoy yourself?
Wow. Yeah, that was an innovation.
Yeah. So I'm saying just that's why you could be a little lighthearted over this in the 1880s, but for the 140 years since then, we haven't had a new social stratum. So we haven't had any new ideas about what creativity should be.
Okay.
He didn't overplay the joke, but the next year he showed up with a couple of other canvases. One called Apoplectic Cardinals Harvesting Tomatoes on the Shore of the Red Sea.
Homie's going to the well too many times.
Well, and Negroes Fighting in a Tunnel at Night.
I like this one.
It was probably translated with a different word than Negroes for most of history, but I don't want to get demonetized off of YouTube. So again, this was the year after. The joke is done here. And to show you just how derivative everything is, have you heard of like John Cage's 433?
No.
He's some avant-garde artist in like the 50s or the 60s. And he says, I'm going to come up with this piece of music, which is 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. And every time it's different because there's different background noise from people coughing or whatever. Like, yeah. Now, first of all, that's pretentious as shit. What does this guy do in, again, the 1880s?
Oh, wow.
A funeral march for the funeral of a deaf man.
Alright.
So, again, it's funny and original in the 1880s.
Yep. Yep.
It's
It was 240 something years ago. This was cutting edge.
So
140.
Yeah, 140. Yeah. So again, yeah, the middle class isn't that old.
No.
And it's going away.
Yep. It was a nice little bump we enjoyed there.
So again, in Paris, you have the fancy academic art, and you have this less prestigious creative community. Of course, the question still stands, why is it that art history professors talk about the Montmartre artists who are not that important in their day and pretend that the important artists don't exist?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah. So we're going to have to take a look at the Montmartre scene in this episode. That's what it's really going to be about. There's just a different ethos. The entrepreneurialism, the hustling, and dare I say it, the bourgeois ethos, for as much as they love to rip on the bourgeois ethos. And this brings us to a man named Ambroise Vollard. Ambroise Vollard. I don't know if I can pronounce it, fucking frogs. So I'm going to call him Ambrose Vollard.
I'm going to call him Pierre.
Yeah.
So what did Pierre do?
So how bougie is this guy? He's born in one of the colonies, Reunion Island, just off the coast of Madagascar. He moves to Paris to study law, but he quickly gives that up because he sees an opportunity. He sees all this hipster art becoming an alternative creative scene, and he starts buying and selling it. But more importantly, he opens a publishing house, and he gets all of these, starving artists to do the illustrations for his books in exchange for food, well, not food, but exposure.
Oh, okay.
Cool. I'll hang your art in my gallery if you do the pictures for my publishing house.
He didn't even give them food. That's great.
Maybe he gave them food. There's no record of him giving food.
No record of that. There's no reason to believe he fed them at any point.
Every artist in Montmartre wants to get in Vollard's good graces if he wants steady work. So this guy kind of becomes the center of Montmartre. And just to be very, very clear, this is like Vice Magazine 2005.
Okay.
So,
freaking Gavin McInnes.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly who he is. He makes a lot of money, but, he never got status from being featured in Vice Magazine.
No, quite the opposite.
So, yeah, just what am I saying here? I'm saying that in 100 years, future historians are going to look at the people in Vice Magazine and say, wow, these must have been the real creatives, the movers and
The
shakers.
do's and don'ts. Oh my.
Nobody under the age of 35 is going to know what the do's and don'ts are.
Oh God. Explain. Remember going to the black market to get Vice Magazine? Jesus.
You know how Vice got really cringe when it got bought by like Disney and became an asset of corporate America?
Yeah.
That's a bit of foreshadowing in our quest to figure out why modern art got so ugly, but that's not going to come until the next episode.
Okay.
But just as Disney buys over Vice Magazine, something's going to happen. In the 1890s and the 1900s, you would go to Vollard's gallery to be that hipster telling your normie friends, I don't follow mainstream art. I see painters that you've never heard of.
Okay.
So, again, across town, the academic art still has the status. Impressionism kind of came and went. It had its moment in the sun, but Impressionism never really sold in France anyways, it sold in America. We talked about that last time as well. Here's a passage from an article written in 1894. One speaks ill of the American art collector. There are, and there always will be, collectors without discernment or taste, looking at artwork only for the signature. A self-respecting collector, it is understood, must have a Meissonier, a Bouguereau, a Millet, a Corot, a Rosa Bonheur, a Rousseau, a Jerome, a Vilbert, or a Cabanel. None of these people. None like that. There's like 10 artists named there. None of the Jeopardy artists are on that list. But more importantly, when he talks about how you speak ill of the American art collector and people without discernment or taste, that is a thinly veiled swipe at the Montmartre crowd, not the Americans.
Okay.
Not a single impressionist was mentioned on that list either, let alone a Van Gogh. On the ground, academic art is going to remain prestigious until World War I, probably even more so in America than in Europe. So just what I'm trying to say here is all the art we're going over today, it's art that survivorship biases its way into the story of art, but none of it is important in its day. And arguably none of it should have been important, but
hipster's gonna hipster.
Hipster is gonna hipsters. Well, the thing is, the problem is not when it's hipster art. The problem is when it goes mainstream. Because again, yeah, when it's just some crazy guy with a handlebar mustache buying an ugly Van Gogh, who cares? It's when every rich person wants to have a Van Gogh in his collection. That's when you really start to miss the guy painting the gladiator. So let's look at what American art was like, because again, the guy took a dig at the Americans there, but the Americans are just as into academic art as the Europeans are. This is Winslow Homer. He's probably the most famous artist of the era of like the late 19th century. He just as Courbet came up with realism, he was the guy doing the peasants. Winslow Homer does American realism, like.
He's coming from Haiti.
Well, I think he's supposed to be like a fisherman or something, but he did a bunch of these seascapes. He also did this one called Snap the Whip, showing, you know, American farm boys. He just didn't have as much disdain for the American working class as Courbet had for the peasants. Like, making the word. I think he did one of the stonecutters and one of them milling wheat. Like, Courbet had, you know, Courbet was a guy who was a champion of the little guy's causes, but you look at his paintings, he didn't seem to like the little guy all that much. Winslow Homer, he seems to have a little more affection for the people in this painting here.
These look like hobbits.
Yeah. Next, John Singer Sargent. He was an expatriate in London most of his life. He was a pretty good portrait painter. This is, I think, called Madame X or something. I think she was his mistress. I can't remember the story behind this, but I mean, he's clearly a talented portrait painter. He's actually the guy who gets chosen to paint Teddy Roosevelt, the official presidential portrait. And Roosevelt is a guy with a strong personality. Sargent is a guy with a strong personality. They fought for 5 days, like, Teddy, sit still, I'm trying to paint you, and like, fuck, how long do I have to sit still for? I have important stuff to do.
Jesus Christ.
And apparently the story behind this painting is after one of their arguments in this 5 days, Teddy Roosevelt just gets so angry that he slams his hand down on the knob at the bottom of the banister, and Sargent says, "Oh, hold it right there. I gotta paint this."
He's probably just scared.
Yeah. Who knows what? All of these stories, I'm sure, are about like 40% truth and 60% bullshit. So who the hell knows? Another thing, though, is he was really good with watercolors.
Wow, that's good work.
Yeah. The interesting thing about this is if you look at the background, the trees in the background aren't really done with that much detail, but you don't notice the trees in the background. The alligators are so detailed that the whole painting seems to work, but the closer you stare at it, you look at the background, okay, the background looks like something, you know, you would do in art class when you were in high school, but the whole painting works overall.
Yeah.
So, again, the Americans are, at this point, even stuffier than the French are, and I mean, the Americans are the culprits. We talked about that in the last episode for art getting ugly. It's a shame because the Americans had some real talent themselves. The other guy worth talking about is a guy named Thomas Eakins, or Akins, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. He does 2 paintings. This is called the Gross Clinic. This guy's Dr. Gross. This is in 1875, just showing what surgery was like at some hospital in Philadelphia. And then 14 years later, he does this one, the Agnew Clinic. Now you see everybody's wearing scrubs. There's a female nurse. So these 2 paintings are often, often juxtaposed to show like how medicine changed over this 15-year period. Also, you know, it shows how much pride Americans took in the fact that technology was changing their culture every 10 or 20 years, as opposed to being completely stagnant since the 70s, other than maybe the iPhone. Like I said, there's some real 1984 shit going on here with those French artists who were airbrushed out of history. You can say maybe they weren't that important at all. Here's why that's bullshit. This guy, he trained in France under Gérôme, who was the guy who did the gladiator painting. And these paintings are part of the traditional art history narrative. So there's no fucking way in hell that those French academic artists just were going out of style if this guy's paintings were still important. But at the very least, we see that the official story of art history that gets written after the fact is very America-centric. You're allowed to talk about academic art in America, but you're not allowed to talk about academic art in France. You're allowed to talk about Impressionism because it got sold in America. We talked about the guy named Paul Durand-Ruel was able to sell a bunch of stuff. He said that French people laugh, Americans buy. But you're not allowed to talk about the academic art in Britain or France. And now in 1890s and 1900s in France, we see one dealer, Villard, becoming the center of the avant-garde art movement. And he seems to be selling a lot of the art that later becomes famous in America. Like he has an exhibition for Gauguin and Cézanne and Van Gogh and Matisse and all these people. So the only question is really, what's that link? Hipster culture is centered in Williamsburg in the 2000s, or maybe the East Village where Rent is set, but it flows downstream to like Portland and Madison, Wisconsin, and some of these places. And the hipsters in Portland and Madison, they're a lot more insufferable because they're dumping their entire trust funds just into LARPing as the people from Brooklyn. Well, you have the same thing in the 1890s. You have this alternative creative scene in Montmartre, but throughout the 1890s, you have something called the secessionist movements, where in the other cities with artistic communities, and again, it's a short list, but you have these other groups of artists who want to leave the academies and have their own little hipster movements, their own little Montmartres, away from the central arbiters of aesthetics and beauty. The most famous one is the Berlin secession. A bunch of Berlin artists leave the official academic channels. And the most recognizable work out of that, it's a work I know we've all seen. That one right there.
Oh, the Scream.
Yep. Yeah, he was by Edward Wilk, who was actually Norwegian, not German, but he was based in Berlin. And the other one is the Vienna secession, whose most iconic artist is Klimt. This painting is called The Kiss. And you'll notice something about this. It was a gold-plated painting that he got commissioned to do. And when you're doing a gold-plated work of art, you can't make it realistic, even if you want to. You know, there's no such thing as gold paint.
Yeah.
So he just kind of leans into the fact that it's going to be stylized and not realistic. So this, this hipster art, this stylized art that's going on in Paris, it seeps into some of the other alternative artistic communities throughout Europe, but again, there's not a lot of them. The other important secession movement is actually in New York City, but it's not a painting secession movement. It's actually photography. Now, we talked last time about how the evolution of art in France was essentially the evolution of technology, like as easels got smaller and paints became available and you didn't have to transport paint through animal bladders. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing, photography changes throughout the 19th century. In the late 1830s, you have a guy named Louis Daguerre who introduces the daguerreotype, which was the first really practical process.
It always amazes me how much technology is part of this process. Like whatever art, whatever medium, it's always technology has a profound effect.
Yeah. Well, so this is the first known picture, or the first known photograph, I should say, of Abraham Lincoln.
Wow, honest Abe. He was a handsome kid, except for the ears.
Yeah. I mean, it's something you take for granted now. I mean, how many pictures do you have of yourself on your phone, or I mean, on your Instagram, if you're young enough to have an Instagram?
Look at the size of those hands. No wonder the guy could wrestle.
Yeah. No, I mean, these days it was a big thing that you had a photograph taken of you at one point in your life.
Wow.
So this is what you call a daguerreotype. You'd polish a copper plate. You'd apply a thin layer of silver and then buff it to a mirror-like finish. Then you'd treat it with iodine fumes to turn it into silver iodide, which is photosensitive. And then you'd expose the plate for several minutes, and certain parts of it would react to the light more than others would. You'd add mercury fumes, which would react with the silver iodide if it had been exposed to light. So you got photographed that way, like you would use sodium thiosulfate to remove the unexposed silver iodide, and then you'd add lacquer, and that would fix it in place. It was kind of a slow process.
I just want to thank all of the Spurge Lords who died figuring that out.
Well, you want to talk Spurge Lords. So purely accidentally, here's the first daguerreotype of a human. Now, do you see a human in this picture?
This is like maybe down bottom left?
Yep, that's exactly what it is. So this was the guy running experiments. He had to expose it for like 20 minutes to get this picture. So this was from his laboratory or studio or whatever, shining the camera out the window or whatever that proto camera was. And most people are walking down the street, so they're not going to stay in place long enough to be exposed. But one guy was getting his shoe shined, so purely accidentally, everybody else was filtered out of this. But the guy getting his shoe shined for 20 minutes ended up being the first guy whose picture was taken by a daguerreotype.
I'm just proud that everybody has their clothes on in this picture. That's good.
Oh, it's friends.
Way to go, humans.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the first thing you did was not a dick pic. Congrats. Point us.
I honestly wonder when the first dick pic was taken.
I bet not long after this. I bet homie figured out this worked and immediately took a picture of his penis.
I'm sure there were pictures of boobs taken because he was French.
It was one of the first things they I'm sure did with that technology. I know what one of the first things they did with but film was like film people. Do stag films.
Oh yeah.
Anyway.
So later on in the 1850s, you have an English guy named Frederick Scott Archer. He's actually a sculptor. So it's just interesting during the Industrial Revolution. That's how fast everything changed. The guy was a sculptor, and yet he tinkered with things enough to invent the new kind of camera that became the standard. It's called the wet plate colliding process. It was much faster. It uses a colloiding of nitrocellulose, ether, and alcohol, silver nitrate, and developing chemicals. So you essentially have to use a darkroom for it.
Okay.
This process, like I said, it's much faster, and it doesn't just allow for more portraiture, for more pictures to be taken, or for more portraits of humans to be taken. It allows for stuff like this, which I'm sure you've seen this in some textbook somewhere.
No, I haven't.
Yeah,
I missed this one. What is this?
Right. Well, this is it's a British woman from the Victorian era named Julia Margaret Cameron. She starts making artistic portraits. So, she was really one of the first people to start using this new technology to make a new kind of art.
Okay.
So in this case, it's a girl with angel wings. I'm sure those were just two feathers or something that she did, but just the idea of using a camera to actually make art as opposed to just recording things. Well, more importantly though, it doesn't just make new art. In 1851, that's when he invents this stuff, and 1855, so this is how fast things moved during the Industrial Revolution.
Wow.
In 1855, you have a dust-up in Crimea.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sure that will have no relevance today.
Yeah, so the Crown commissions a guy named Roger Fenton to document the Crimean War, and on the opposite side of the Atlantic in 1861, you have a bit of a dust-up in the United States over whether it should be legal to pay your gardeners with room and board. So you have a photographer named Matthew Brady. So these two men on opposite sides of the Atlantic, they become the first war photographers documenting what happens from the front.
Everyone stand still for 20 minutes.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong by saying that. Well, in the British guy chose to take pictures of soldiers who were alive. The American guy didn't. So
that's a better subject if you have these technological limitations.
So, like I said, it's a cumbersome process. You have to set up a dark room. So both of these guys went to Crimea or to whatever the current battle in the Civil War was.
Cornfield X.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they had to set up their portable dark rooms in Cornfield X. But they both managed. Now, like I said, the British photography, it was a little bit more propagandistic. Like, you had stuff like camp life, officers, landscapes, maybe the aftermath of a battle, but not the actual battle scenes.
Smart. Yeah. It's probably smart.
Yeah. Well, that's how the British do things. The Americans
have a different approach.
Yeah. Again, this is another picture from the Crimean War. Again, this is clearly propagandistic. Here's the American. Here's the Civil War. He was like I said, he was just a little more willing to show dead bodies. Like, here's the soldiers in camp or in formation getting ready for battle, and here's the aftermath of the battle. It's maybe
a grinder, boys.
Again, there's a reason why the Civil War plays such a large role in the American psyche.
One thing I want to note, most countries got rid of slavery with an act of parliament.
Yeah, they didn't have to have a war that killed 2% of their population.
At one point, they were importing people just to send
Irish, yeah. Oh, there is I think Irish immigrant is a euphemism for war mercenary. So.
Celt's gonna Celt, man.
Yeah, and here's another nice wholesome picture from the Civil War.
Jeez, it's just lining up. Oh God.
Yeah. Well, this is we'll probably have to do an episode on the Civil War at some point. Like, in World War I, it was considered like just inhuman when you had 10% casualties in a battle. In the Civil War, you'd regularly have a third of the people dying.
Jesus. And that's just in battle. Like, all the diseases and things that went along with just not having proper sanitary conditions and not proper food. And I'm going to at some point do a podcast. I'm going to try to do war as a topic, starting with the ancient Greeks and going, but.
Well, we like to think of World War I as the big reality check for Europeans faced with trench warfare for the first time. In reality, they didn't pay attention to the Boer War, and especially they didn't pay attention to the U.S. Civil War. You can say we were surprised by technology. You can't say we were surprised by trench warfare.
Yep. No, there's a lot. You look through history, there's very few excuses.
More importantly, though, paintings of battles have now become obsolete. Like the painting of Napoleon winning a battle and commissioning some salon painter to paint a huge canvas the size of a wall and sending it from museum to propagandize the people. That's over. You just need to put a bunch of these pictures in the newspaper.
Here are your kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, here were your kids.
Yeah, here were your kids. Now they're fertilizer.
Yeah. Well, at least 3/4 of your kid's coming back. 3/4 of his limbs are still attached.
And they'll have no psychological problems. They're going to be fine.
So photography makes war paintings obsolete, or at least historical war paintings. Maybe not obsolete, but yeah, obsolete. One other thing photography does is it makes you realize just how much detail gets filtered out. Like we're on the 15th floor of a high-rise right now. Look how many trees you have out there. There's probably 100 cars you can see, maybe 50 lampposts. If you wanted to paint this, you don't need to paint 50 lampposts to get the point across. But when you start taking pictures of things, you realize just how much detail there is in reality that gets left out even of a realistic painting. So that's kind of one of the reasons that Impressionism starts shortly after this, is you realize doesn't matter how photorealistic you try to be, you're not getting all this stuff.
Can't compete, not going to try.
Yep. Yeah, like observation versus interpretation, or more importantly, art versus documentation. Like there's the image of the girl with the angel wings. That's clearly art. But at some point, there's going to be a fine line between art and documentation. This picture on the screen is not art at all. But where do you draw that line? Like, in fact, more generally, I mean, this is a history podcast. Every culture has some sort of record keeping. Well, at least every culture that can write has some sort of record keeping. But not every culture has a concept of history. That's a very Western thing. In fact, one of the things that kind of defines a religion is its concept of time. Like, think of Christian religion, there's creation and then there's the end times, and the concept of the future is towards the end times. Whether you're an optimist or a pessimist depends on how you view the end times. But you have religions like Hinduism and Buddhism where everything's a circle. You expect to be reincarnated. You have this concept of samsara. It's not a given that a culture is going to have the same concept of history that we have. Like, you got married in Southeast Asia. After the wedding, I traveled around Thailand for a bit. Going to a Thai museum, like, they just don't understand. It's just, okay, here's a bunch of old artifacts that we've dumped in a room. Like, any story here? How is this relevant? These are old artifacts.
God bless the Siamese. The Malaysian National Museum has 5 wings, each one dedicated to somebody who came as a colonial power.
The Portuguese came and they gave us weapons, and the Dutch came, they showed us how to run a port, and the British came and they showed us how to run a government, and the Japanese came and we don't talk about that.
Well, and the Japanese weren't the worst. It was they had at one point got invaded by a bunch of Filipino pirates.
I didn't know that.
With these weird swords. Hey, look it up, guys, if it's interesting. History of Malaysia, but the Malaysians see their history as a series of and then these people ran us, and then these people ran us, and then it's just very different than a Western interpretation of these kind of things.
Probably my favorite historical little tidbit, speaking about that part of the world, because of the Spanish Empire, in the Philippines, you had a battle with Spanish conquistadors, Japanese samurai, and Aztecs.
I would love. Why don't you make a movie about that?
Yeah.
Hollywood, come on, you gonna remake some shit? Make a movie about the fucking the Aztecs and the samurai and the fighting the freaking conquistadors. That's what we should be watching. We shouldn't be watching like Barbie 2 or whatever you're gonna churn out.
So, like I said, you had a bit of artistic portraiture in the 1850s, but the subject still has to sit for it. Things get really interesting in 1888 when you get another invention that changes things. It's when Eastman invents the Kodak camera, and his slogan is, "You press the button, we do the rest." So, we see ourselves moving towards the age of every white girl putting every moment of her life on Instagram.
Yeah. The cost of the photo got very low. Now they're free.
So, again, we keep talking a lot about how art from Europe eventually spreads to America, and yes, I'll get to that eventually. But the thing I just want to make clear about photography is it's kind of the one form of art that goes the opposite way. It's the one that starts in America, specifically in New York, and moves to Europe. It's a truly homegrown American art form. I mean, you do have your British and French photographers, but it's really something.
We'll add this to jazz and biker gangs as the American cultural contributions.
Yeah. And they didn't invent the camera, but they invented art, or at least they invented artistic pictures. Just like
Point Yankees.
Just like Thomas Edison invented the video camera, but different group invented Hollywood.
That's a great story.
Copyright laws, well, yes, they technically do exist in California, but in those days, it's really hard to enforce them.
Yep. No, they'll swear up and down that it was because of the beautiful lighting. It's also because cameras were still under copyright. So that's why, Hollywood is where it is. It's an interesting story. We'll tell it at some point. But talk about the intersection of law and art and technology, and the chosen people.
Oh, they'll be playing a role in this story. Don't you worry.
I'm shocked. That's what I keep thinking. I'm like, wait, there's been very few Jewish people so far in this story.
Just wait. They're really going to play a big role in the next episode, but just wait. This episode, we haven't gotten there yet.
We never set out to say it was them, but sometimes we check and it's them. Yeah. We got to be honest with you.
Also, I mean, we're talking about a form of art that develops in New York City, so...
You want to talk about a very interesting section of the Jewish diaspora is centered in New York City. Very interesting.
So, like I said, you have artistic photography starting to develop, and you start seeing things like laying out a picture in the same way that you would if you got models to pose for a painting. Like, that was not at all obvious to the guy who invented the camera, that you could do stuff like that.
You're seeing the artistic technique being applied to this new technology.
This is a photograph called A Sea of Steps by, I think he was a British guy named Frederick Evans. It's a photograph of the inside of a church, but more importantly, he's setting up the lighting to light it a certain way to take an artistic photograph of it, and he's lighting it the same way you would light it if you were to make a painting of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It also involves things like using lenses to play with focus or filters to blur things. So this is a famous picture of the Flatiron Building in New York. You'll see that it's a little bit blurry, but it's intentionally blurry for artistic effect. That wasn't just taken on a foggy day. This is intentionally made blurry for effect.
Okay.
Another thing you see is using chemicals to alter textures.
There's my species.
Yeah.
We weren't going long. I knew we were gonna see some stuff.
Yeah, this was a French guy who did this one as well.
There we go. Vive la France.
It's called Struggle.
This
is called the gum bichromate process, just using some sort of chemicals when you're developing it to do effects like this. And another thing you see at the time is multiple exposures for like the image of movement. Sorry, let me repeat that.
So exploring the limits of the technology and the properties of it.
Yeah.
Starting to see that become its own.
Yeah. So let's park this idea because it's going to affect painting in a big way when we get to the futurists. Talking about artistic photography and talking about the chosen people in New York, the central figure is a guy named Alfred Stieglitz. I mean, he's a Jew, but he's at least a German Jew, not like an Ellis Island Polish Jew. His parents had been there for a while. He didn't embarrass people at the country club. Stieglitz, he's actually married to Georgia O'Keeffe, the woman who made the paintings of the flowers that all look like vaginas.
Jesus, all right.
I think she denied that they were ever supposed to look like vaginas, but they look like vaginas.
If she was unaware of that, that's even more interesting in terms of, her potential latent issues.
So,
Mr. Garrison level.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, Stieglitz, he opens an art gallery called the Little Galleries of the Photo Secession, but it later becomes known as the 291. That's the address. I think it's on Fifth Avenue or something. But the 291 becomes the center of modern art in America later on. So, that's a little bit of a tease as to how the tribe starts,
Where this is heading.
Yeah, so I keep dancing around it. We've talked about the other secessions in Europe. We've talked about photography. We've talked about the Montmartre being the original hipster neighborhood. I keep dancing around it. Let's just get down to what the actual art looks like. So, like I said, there's breakout secession movements in Berlin, Vienna, New York, and a few other minor ones in Munich, Copenhagen, Moscow. There's even one in St. Louis, believe it or not. St. Louis used to be called the Paris of the Midwest before it was hands up, don't shoot.
Meet me in St. Louis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the civil rights movement did a number on American cities.
Do they still have streetcars?
So, like I said, in Montmartre in the 1890s, Paul Durand-Ruel, he was the art dealer who was selling all the Impressionist paintings in America. He's still in business. He's still selling Impressionist and now at this point Post-Impressionist stuff. At some point, Vincent van Gogh shows up, leaves like a fart in the wind and kills himself. The artists, they're still hustling business from the newly formed middle class and decrying the bourgeoisie who are their customers. And as I said, there's one art dealer named Ambrose Villard in particular who makes people famous. But just to be clear, being showcased at Villard's gallery is still B-list at best. It's Montmartre famous. It's not famous.
This is the Blumhouse.
Yeah.
Of side.
Well, again, it's like, yes, if you were a punk in the 70s and you played CBGB, that was a big fucking deal, but you're also not Bruce Springsteen. You're not the guy who gets the contract with Columbia Records or one of the major labels. I mean, I'm not saying CBGB was anything to shake a stick at. I'm just saying that being in Villard's gallery was the equivalent of CBGB. It was not the equivalent of, I don't know, being Led Zeppelin. So who does Villard's showcase? So one of the first and arguably the most influential person from the perspective of the modern art history narrative, the one that gets taught in universities now, was Paul Cézanne. And Villard exhibits him in 1895. There he is. There's his self-portrait. He's autistic French guy who doesn't have the best people skills.
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
So, we're talking about Montmartre being the proto-hipster neighborhood. The thing you have to understand about Cézanne is he's not one of these hipster bohemians. He had been hanging around with the Impressionists from the time that they were just a bunch of Academy rejects hanging around in the cafes, and this was before the Franco-Prussian War.
Okay.
So he's an older guy.
Every group of young artists needs a creepy, older, awkward guy.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to that. There's one of those guys too.
Oh, good.
Remember that a couple of them served in the Franco-Prussian. Remember that a couple of the Impressionists had served in the Franco-Prussian War. In fact, even one of them, Bazille, had been killed in combat. But most of them said, we're artists, we're not fighters, so they fled either to London or some of them to the south of France. Cezanne is a very provincial guy from the south of France. He's a bit of a country bumpkin. I mean, he tries to make it in Paris, but he's just not the kind of personality who
Doesn't have the
does well.
soft skills.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, Cezanne, he is hanging out the Impressionists like 10 years before their first show, and their first show was in 1874. Vollard does a Cezanne exhibition 10 years after Impressionism is finished, when the big pointillist painting from Ferris Bueller is shown. So, like, he is not some young iconoclast. He's already in his 50s when he has his big moment at the Vollard Gallery. And he's the guy who watched his other Impressionist friends have success selling their stuff in America, but success just missed him.
Aww.
He can live comfortably in the south of France, but only because he inherits daddy's money, because of course his dad was a banker.
There's usually some funds behind these kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah, his dad dies in his mid-40s, but he had moved to Paris in his 20s after studying law to work in his dad's bank, and he said, fuck it, I'm going to be an artist. Gets rejected by the École des Beaux-Arts, but again, this is the 1860s, and this is really the first time that you say, fuck it, the Academy is not going to accept me, I'll try to make art on my own. And he becomes friends with the Impressionists. He goes to the Academy Suisse, but that's like the equivalent of going to Roxbury Community College instead of going to Harvard.
Yeah, it's not gonna open a lot of doors.
But remember how I said this was the first time that artists could make a living if they had hustle, regardless of how much talent they had?
Yeah, there's finally enough money in the economy to support different stuff.
So at the Academy Suisse, he meets that creepy old, I guess he's the creepy old artist of the next generation. The creepy old artist of Cezanne's generation was Camille Pissarro. And Pissarro is just kind of the ultimate hustler. He's actually a Jew as well. He was born in one of the colonies in the Caribbean, I think it was Martinique. He moves to Paris when he's in his 20s as well. He decides to be an artist. His dad's a merchant selling textiles in the Caribbean.
I'm so glad it was textiles. I was really worried.
I'm just saying, like, you can say he's not necessarily the first Jewish artist. He's the first Jewish artist to support himself with daddy's wholesaling business.
Okay. That's a new trope.
Pissarro, he's just the guy who moves to Paris. He's the guy who couch surfs his whole life. Everybody seems to, at least everybody in Montmartre who we now know seems to have crossed paths with Pissarro at some point.
He's like a Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
All right.
And again, he still at the end of the day works for daddy's importing companies. So when he needs an infusion of money, he can put the paints aside for a little bit and crank up the margins on the textiles.
Economics, people. A lot of artistic forces are shaped by economic forces a lot of the time, and this is an example.
So all of the Impressionists and all of the Post-Impressionists, unsurprisingly, all the important art dealers, they're all friends with Pissarro. And like I said, he is not necessarily some kind of, high-class mover and shaker. He's like Kramer from Seinfeld. He's the guy who knows Bob Sacamano, who can always get you the tickets to the Yankees game. He's that guy. There's always that guy. Pissarro is that guy. So Cezanne, he studies at the Beast-Tier school, but he's fortunate enough to meet Pissarro. And Pissarro is the guy who's in the middle of organizing this other group of bohemian fuck-ups who eventually become the Impressionists. Like I said, they all know him. He, like I said, Cezanne, he does stay until the Franco-Prussian War, but he's he's a country bumpkin among these guys. But he is friends with he is friends with Kramer from Seinfeld, which, at least in hipster world, it helps to know Kramer from Seinfeld.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Cezanne is also a childhood friend of Emile Zola, Jacques guy.
Oh.
Zola becomes a famous author and critic because, like I said, of course, everybody knows everybody else in this world.
It's a small little world these people live in.
Yeah, Cezanne does have a falling out with Zola after Zola has become famous, and Zola writes a novel about a failed artist, and it's very clear who he's writing about. But yeah, after the Franco-Prussian War, Pizarro invites Cezanne back to Paris, and every art history textbook talks about this as a time when they influence each other. That's bullshit. I know these types. Pizarro just wants to split rent.
Yep.
I don't care what every art history book says. I guarantee Pizarro's like, oh fuck, I'm having trouble making rent. I need a roommate.
Yep.
I guarantee you that's what was happening.
Hipster's gonna hipster.
But this is when Pizarro gets Cezanne into the first Impressionist show, which is absolutely panned by the critics. And that's when Cezanne says, yeah, fuck this. I'm moving back to the south of France and living off my trust fund.
I'm going where it's warm.
And, I know the type here. He's like 37 at this point and still just wants to live off of daddy's money as long as he can. That's a type. If you spend any time around bohemian communities, you know that type.
Yeah, the guy's been there way too long.
So, Cezanne, he never really becomes part of the wave of Impressionists who get in with Paul Durand-Ruel and sells the art in America, so he misses out on that. So, in the 1880s, when that opportunity's all gone, when it's finished, his dad dies, gets his inheritance, and he's just going to live out his days as a cantankerous old artist in Provence. When Villard, and Villard is only like 25 when he opens his art gallery. When he starts selling all his avant-garde art in the early 1890s, he doesn't want to look for some upstart Andy Warhol himbo type figure. He wants to get this leftover impressionist.
Okay.
So the standard art history story says this is Cezanne's big break when he gets showcased at Villard's gallery. But again, I gotta ask, is it really? Because he's still going to spend the rest of his life on his inheritance as this miserable autistic guy in the south of France. He's like a germaphobe to the point where he doesn't like touching his kid.
Jesus Christ.
And yeah, when he finally dies in 1906, he's pissed off his wife to the point, they're still married, but his wife and kids are spending all their time in Paris, so he dies alone. I think he's in the middle of a painting or something when he does that. Is that really the guy's big break when he's still just an aging, miserable guy living off his inheritance? I don't know. But the most important question is this. It's always the most important question is the guy any good? We've always got to ask that. The black turtleneck crowd sometimes says that he's the end of Renaissance art and the start of something new that eventually becomes modern art. But we have to ask what they mean by that. This is the 1880s, the 1890s. The Renaissance was finished in the mid-1500s. So what the hell does it mean that this guy's the end of Renaissance art? Well, from the time of Vasari onwards, and again, guys, we've done 3 episodes on this. If you don't know who Vasari is, go back a couple of episodes. But from the time of Vasari onwards, there's an official way of doing shadows, horses, buildings, Jesus, body parts, whatever. And one of these things you have to do is make things realistic and do it according to the academic way of painting things. Look at this painting here.
Wow, it's clean.
Yeah, it's clean. This is some town in Italy. This is the central plaza of it. There's a fountain in the middle of it. I'd be wowed if I were walking through a museum and saw this painting. But I need you to notice something here. See these yellow lines? They're all parallel with each other.
Yeah.
Some of them are in the foreground, some of them are in the background. but they're all parallel with each other on the plane. Why is that? It's because each one of these individual lines is itself parallel with the plane.
Some kind of rule?
Well, it's just how you make perspective work.
Oh, okay. So using this technique.
Yeah.
All right.
So also look at these lines, the vertical lines. Again, some of them are in the foreground, some of them are in the background, but all of these vertical lines are still parallel with the plane of the picture frame. So they're still parallel with each other. Even if you had like diagonal lines that were still parallel with the picture frame, they would still appear parallel. But there's other lines that are parallel in real life, like these two. They're going front to back, but it still looks realistic. These two lines, like I said, they're starting in the foreground, going into the background, so they're not parallel with the plane of the image. So how do you make this work in Renaissance art? Well, you'll notice that every line that's parallel with those lines meets in one point.
Okay.
Every line that's like perpendicular to the picture frame, but it doesn't need to be perpendicular to the frame. It's just as long as they're parallel to each other, but not parallel with the picture frame, you just have to make them meet in one point. It doesn't matter which point it is, but that's how you make perspective look realistic.
Interesting.
The Renaissance artists, they figured out this technique of making things look realistic. In fact, it's one of the things that defines Renaissance art is their perspective techniques. And this is called single point perspective. We live in an age where computer graphics are ubiquitous, but this is what your computer is doing every time when it's trying to render something in 3 dimensions. Like if you use 3JS or any other graphics package, there is an option for a perspective camera or an isometric camera. A perspective camera is exactly this. It has a focal point, which just means like moving the point where all the parallel lines meet. So here, this is the same cube viewed with a different focal point of the camera, but wherever you put the focal point, it doesn't matter because still every parallel line meets in one point in the distance.
Okay.
If you've played computer games, especially if you played them in the 90s, you're used to something called the isometric camera, where there's no perspective and all parallel lines remain parallel. So here's Q*bert and Roller Coaster Tycoon, Baldur's Gate, and Diablo. I think that's Diablo 2, actually. These, if you look at it, the parallel lines from front to back, they're not meeting in a point in the distance. They still remain parallel. So this works when you're playing a video game, but there's no way you could set up a camera in real life to replicate any of these pictures.
Yeah.
Because if you were to set up a camera, all of the parallel lines would seem to meet in one point, unless they're parallel with the frame of the image. Here's 3 chess games. You'll see that the 2 images on the left are the chessboard in perspective. So you see that the parallel lines are not parallel with each other. They're kind of converging in the distance in the 2 boards on the left.
Okay.
But the board on the right is an isometric image.
Yeah.
The parallel lines are all still parallel with each other. So again, you could not take a picture of a chessboard that looked like the one on the right, but you could take a picture that looked like the 2 on the left.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I bring up chessboards is when you look at a lot of Renaissance art, you see a lot of paintings of churches with checkerboard patterns on the floor, and they use this as a way to guide the perspective. You'll notice one thing about this painting, it doesn't just look realistic, but the perspective doesn't just need to be from front to back the way it did in the painting of the Italian Plaza. Now this is from an angle, so you have some parallel lines going off to the right and some parallel lines going off to the left. For example, these two lines here, they're parallel with each other, and you can tell they're parallel with each other. You just have to use the checkerboard as a guide. So these two lines, they don't look like they should be parallel, but they are. But more importantly, they're also parallel with these flags and some of these architectural features as well. So in theory, all of these lines should meet in one point, and they do.
Wow.
So just, you know, letting you see the magician doing his tricks here. Like I said, it's not just like the first Renaissance painting where there's just one point in the distance that everything meets. Now there have to be multiple perspective points. So, you know, you see this. You see all of these are sets of parallel lines using the architecture, well, just using the laws of physics and the laws of architecture. These lines have to be parallel with each other in real life. And you see all of these blue lines meet in one point on the left, all of these yellow lines meet in one point, and all of the red lines meet in one point. So if you want to make a painting like this, it's difficult enough if you're just doing it square on front to back, but here you have to have a whole bunch of these perspective points to make it work. And the checkerboard on the floor is often the way these artists would, I don't want to say cheat, but it's the way they would make sure that the perspective all worked. So if next time you're in a museum looking at a bunch of Renaissance art, when you see a painting of a church, it's more likely than not it'll have a checkerboard pattern.
The more you know.
Yep. This is a painting you may have seen. It's M.C. Escher's Waterfall.
Okay.
Have you seen this one? No.
I haven't seen this one.
So it's an optical illusion. Like, this is not possible. How is the water flowing downhill from the mill and then somehow ending up at the top of the waterfall? Like, this is perpetual motion shit. The guy was a 20th century artist who liked doing optical illusions like this. So the question is, how does he do something like this that looks realistic? Well, now we know how the perspective is done. So in theory, all of these lines should be parallel with each other. At least architecturally, they're all parallel with each other. So they should all meet in the same point off in the distance. Well, let's zoom out a bit. No, they don't.
Jeez.
That's how he does that. That's how the magician does his trick.
Okay.
All of the green lines meet in one point. So all of the, if you were to set up a camera to try to make a structure that looks like this optical illusion, all of those, the features represented by the green line would have to be parallel, but the ones with the red lines actually wouldn't be. They might just look parallel from the point of view of the camera.
Okay.
Like in reality, some of the water is actually flowing uphill there, which is why it works in the painting but wouldn't work in real life because gravity doesn't work that way.
It sets very badly on the eye.
Yeah.
Like my brain's trying to put that together and it's just not working.
I
I feel like he's trolling me.
If you've seen Labyrinth, I think there's a few of Escher's paintings that inspired some of the sets. Labyrinth was a drug trip.
Yes, it was. The 80s were a very, very libertine time.
Not just for drugs.
Nope. Also for puppets.
So, when we say that Cezanne broke all the Renaissance rules, what are we talking about? All these paintings, you know, they're not the most photorealistic, but there's something just a little bit off about all of them. Like, let's start with the one in the top left. That basket in the background, see, you seem to be looking at it at eye level. You're looking at it straight on. But that pot or that vase or whatever it is, you're looking down into it. Like, that, just not physically possible.
Yeah.
So this is what Cezanne does. He says, you know what, fuck the rules of perspective. If you want something that's photorealistic, we can set up a camera anyways. So, you know, I have the essence of a jug or a pot is looking down into it. I'm going to make it so you're looking down into it, even if it fucks up all the rest of the perspective. The one on the right the top right is called the basket of apples. Again, you're looking down into the basket, but if you look at the way the apples are shaded, it's almost like you're looking up on them.
Yeah.
It's not something you notice at first glance, but the more you stare at that painting, the more you realize something's just a bit off. You know, he's focused on form and color, so what does he do if he wants to play around with these rules of perspective? He just puts black outlines around a bunch of these apples, because that makes it a little bit less disturbing to the eye. Something just seems off about it. Something seems uncanny about it. You can't put your finger on it, but that's what's going on. The perspectives are just a little bit off, and he's compensating for it with black outlines. You know, he always said you want to get the essence of the apple. Who cares what the apple actually looked like? Again, because he was just a cantankerous spurg.
Yeah.
He would spend months on these paintings, and the joke would always be like, those apples must have rotted away a long time ago.
Yeah.
Another thing you'll notice about the one on the bottom right is the foreground seems to blend into the background, and the background is dark, so like, does it follow the rules of perspective or does it not? Is it possible to tell even with that weird dark background?
A lot of ambiguity.
Yeah. And the one on the bottom left, that's the most important one, because the perspective lines are all completely fucked up on that painting. Like, let's just look at these. The lines of the table are wonky and crooked first of all, but more importantly, these blue lines are things that should all be going front to back, and they're going all over the place.
Helter-skelter.
So it's helter-skelter, but it's just hard to tell that it's helter-skelter from looking at it. Your brain knows something's off here, but it can't figure out what.
Down low, helter-skelter.
So another Renaissance technique that Cezanne is ignoring is shadowing. In one of the classic Renaissance techniques is chiaroscuro. So, like, is the girl with the pearl earring, the Mona Lisa, and I think that's a painting by Raphael. I can't remember who did the one in the middle. Put it in the comments, guys. These paintings are all completely realistic, but they're contrived. They would have to be done in a dark room with a light source that would be put in a very unnatural place, even though they are realistic. I mean, if you were to put the light in the right place, you could make any of these paintings, but nobody's going to sit in a black room with the spotlight shining on their face.
Yeah, it looks very like community theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And it's not just used for Renaissance paintings, it's also used for like still lifes of fruit as well. If you want to learn to be an artist and paint your still lifes of fruit baskets, here's a trick you can do. You can do chiaroscuro. You set up a light, shine it on your fruit basket, and most of the painting's going to be black anyways. So it's still realistic, but you have to paint a lot less detail.
Right back to the freaking dark room of the photo.
Yeah.
The photo developer.
Yep. So this painting here, again, it's at first glance, it's maybe not the most realistic. It's a little more abstract, a little more stylized, but again, something just seems a little bit off about this. And just that the shading is all off on these apples, and especially on the plant. There's nowhere you could set up a proper light source to make the light work that way.
The more I try to process this, the more my brain hurts.
Yeah, and the thing is, it does, like, at first glance, there's not necessarily anything wrong with it, but just the more you stare at it, again, it's just one of the things that Cezanne does is he says, forget proper perspective, I'm going to create the image of depth through shading. And that shading is not necessarily going to be the chiaroscuro method of what the shading would look like if light were put in an unrealistic place. He also does people, These are a set of paintings, or a famous set of paintings called the Card Players. Uh, Notice there's just no depth here. The people are done in a very minimalistic way, and it gets the essence of the people across. And I lived in the south of France. There were a lot of peasants in the south of France who spent their days playing cards. He very much gets their essence across, but these are flat backgrounds, and like there's just, again, just the rules of how you would make depth work just don't seem to be existent here.
Yeah, like two-dimensional.
Yeah, that's what that's why the black turtleneck crowd likes to say Cezanne broke, the mold in so many ways, is because he was able to use flatness to express things. Is that just masturbation? Probably. And again, the real art people in Paris didn't give a shit about this stuff. They were still buying the beautiful pictures of gladiators. So let's just be clear here. This stuff got famous decades after the fact. Nobody cared about it at the time. Nobody said, oh, this guy's a genius breaking all the rules of perspective and depth. Most importantly, though, he does landscapes, and he does a lot of landscapes that feature that mountain. That's Mont Sainte-Victoire. That's a mountain that appears in something like 40 of his paintings, because it's the mountain near where he grew up, and the main mountain near where he retired to when he was living off of daddy's money. This is supposed to be the inside of a quarry, so again, the rules of perspective are fucked up because you're looking at that mountain head on, but you're supposed to be down in a quarry here. Also,
does not compute.
I'm just going to say, if I lived in Paris in 1895 and I had all sorts of money, given the choice between Jerome's gladiator painting and this, I'm not sure I would buy this one.
Absolutely not. Sometimes the establishment's right.
Yeah?
It fucking kills me to say that, but
well,
that's growing up, kids.
That's kind of the whole point, though, is it's not just how did art get ugly. This stuff, nobody wanted it at the time, is why do we retroactively say this is the important stuff and the beautiful stuff isn't? That's where we're not going to get there till the next episode, but I'll give you a hint. It involves some academics in New York.
Jeez. East Coast elites.
Here's another important painting. If you look at it, again, the perspective is fucked up, but it's kind of hard to say why at first glance. There's almost like horizontal bands in this painting, and each one of these horizontal bands has a different perspective point. Like the lines on the right-hand side are kind of going off into the distance, and the parallel lines on the left-hand side are kind of going off the page. So again, he has these perspective lines that are just going in all weird and unrealistic directions, but he's compensating for that again. This time, he's not compensating for it with black outlines, he's compensating for it with his shading.
Okay.
Makes the gradient of one color blend into another color when he goes from one horizontal band to another horizontal band, and it's gradual enough that your eyes don't really notice it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is easier on the processing, on the visual processing.
This is a very important painting from the point of view of the 2025 art history professor.
Okay.
We'll see why in a little bit. This painting will become very important 10 years later. But this is the Bay of Marseille as seen from L'Estaque. So this is just near where he lives, and he writes in a letter that he thinks the bay looks like a playing card, and I think that's almost how he paints it. You'll see that like the houses in the foreground, the sea, the mountains, and the sky, they're just kind of four almost different paintings. They're all following their own rules. There's no united story this picture's trying to tell.
Very mosaic.
Yeah. But crucially, and again, this is why I'm saying this is going to come back in a little bit, look at those houses in the foreground. There's really not a lot of detail with them. They're almost like children's blocks. when you're talking about a perspective painting, there's a grid that whether you process it or not, there's a grid that all the lines follow.
Yeah.
The architecture of those minimalized houses almost plays the role of that grid.
Okay.
You'll see very soon why that's important. One other thing that Cezanne does is he writes in a letter, he says that all paintings can be reduced to the sphere, the cone, and the cylinder. And you can very much see that in the forms in this painting here. This almost looks like Art Deco. This is something that almost looks like it could be from the 30s.
And his philosophy sounds like something out of Pythagoras' freaking ramblings.
Well, he's a... French people love to put their academic theories and everything. Like, I know somebody who had to change planes in Paris airport and saw that they were selling, like, Immanuel Kant's writings in the airport bookstore there.
Jeez.
The French are...
Sophisticated.
Yeah, they're sophisticated. They're just not always practical. There's a joke that England and France are opposite halves of a functioning society.
Yeah, that's fair.
This is another painting. Here you almost see no depth at all. This is what I meant earlier. He's just leaning into using color gradients, like having one color blending into another color or fading into another color.
It looks like Muskoka.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, there's no perspective, there's no depth here. It's a solid blue background. That's, again, modern art academics say he was able to turn flatness into an art. Agree, disagree with that, but I mean, I'm trying to give the devil his due. I'm saying you can see that in this painting.
He's doing something.
Yeah. And this is one of the last paintings he does before he dies. This is where you see everything that I talked about. You see flatness, you see color gradations, and you see geometry. Like, look at the shape on the far right. Is that the ass crack of somebody bending over, or is that the cleavage of a woman facing forward?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, nobody knows. Yeah, right here. That's Cezanne, and Cezanne is often called the father of modern art, but nobody knows him. Nobody even cares about him when he's alive. Nobody thinks he's a genius. When he's in his 50s, he finally gets an exhibition at the Vallard Gallery, and like the new generation of 21-year-old bohemians who weren't good enough to get into the equivalent of the New York Ballet, like the ones who still want to be these hustling Montmartre artists, it kind of becomes a thing. They all make a pilgrimage to the south of France to visit this cantankerous old painter and probably get told to get off his lawn.
He's like the Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah, exactly. The next person Vallard has an exhibit of is Vincent van Gogh. Now, this is after Van Gogh dies, and this is when this mythology starts to grow around Van Gogh as this tortured artist who the world just wasn't ready for. Again, in reality, he's just this crazy creative who puts out a lot of paintings at a time when brightly colored paint becomes widely available. Some of these collectors add a piece or two to their collection, and then when the world decides after World War I that they want a bunch of this modern stuff, his paintings start to sell for a bunch. But all this talk about how he was the first guy to use color properly, yeah, he was the first guy who had access to paints, like bright colors. Like, who is Van Gogh? He's the fuck-up kid of a minister. He tries preaching, he tries a few jobs, moved to England in his 20s, and by the time he's 30, he's fucked up at everything he's ever done, and says, you know what? I'm going to move to Paris to be a painter. Of course, he has a younger brother named Theo, who you might call an enabler.
Yeah. Sorry, Theo.
Yeah, he actually encourages Vincent's career, and the two of them have all sorts of correspondence. And Vincent is, shall we say, not the most stable human being.
He's...
Yeah. Well, but that's kind of why this mythology grows around him. It's because we have this correspondence with his brother. Like the guy, Surratt, the guy who did the painting with all the dots, the Ferris Bueller painting. If you want to talk about tortured geniuses at the time when bright paint is widely available, that guy's probably as tortured of a genius as Van Gogh was, but he's keeps to himself. He's Rain Man in his little laboratory, and he dies young after living a completely sheltered private life. So we don't know anything about the guy. But was Van Gogh any more or less of a tortured genius than this guy? No, he was just the guy who wrote a bunch of these letters where we got to see his insane thoughts.
Well, the personality is a big part of the art. Mm-hmm. Like, people sell you on an artist. When we get to outsider art in a later podcast, it's like, you guys will see how important, like, the personality of the artist is to, like, you know, selling it to, you know, markets.
So, whether it's true or not, Van Gogh is remembered as the guy who freed art from the constraints of colors. When he decides to learn to paint, he's already 30. He's a Dutch Protestant, so when he moves back to Holland to learn how to paint, his palette in the Netherlands is a little less colorful.
There's no tulips? Come on, buddy.
This is happy for Dutch Protestants.
Yeah,
this is the most cheerful thing I've ever seen come out of a Dutch Protestant.
They are a big influence on the Puritans in the UK, or what would become the UK.
The joke is that Dutch Reformed people say that the Puritans dance too much. So, now you have to pay attention to the years here, because he dies in 1890. These are his early paintings. These are all done in like 1884, 1885. So everything that you know Van Gogh for is done in a very, very compressed period.
You know, it's called a manic episode.
Well, here's the thing. I have had to like drive myself almost as nuts as Vincent Van Gogh learning this stuff for this podcast. There's maybe 30 of these people and they all know each other. And that's why when you look at art from this age, or at least you look at the story of modern art, you can do things like nerd out on these dates. You can say this had to have been done after 1886 because he moved to Paris in 1886. You can do that when there's only like 30 of these people. And I don't mean 30 people in Paris, I mean 30 people in Europe. You can't really do that in an age where every university is full of insufferable fine arts majors. There's only 30 of these people. Everybody else is in the factory or sweeping chimneys or whatever.
Making bread, tilling fields.
So in 1885, Van Gogh takes a trip to Antwerp, and you know he writes in one of his letters about seeing Peter Paul Rubens and Delacroix and on this trip, and more importantly though, he gets exposed to an exhibit of Japanese art.
Ooh.
Now, you have to understand something about these Paris artists, especially the Montmartre crowd. They're weebs. They fetishize Japan in exactly the same way that hipsters fetishize anime today. Exactly the same way.
Everything old is new again.
Mm-hmm. He likes the forms and the craftsmanship of the Japanese wood block paintings or the Japanese woodcuts. Tell me that there's no influence there. Just
you can see
very
strong influence.
So in 1886, he moves to Paris. He hangs out in Montmartre. Like 1886 is the year of the last Impressionist show, where he sees the Sunday Afternoon in the Isle of Le Grand Jatte, the Pointless painting by Surratt. Probably stares at it exactly like Ferris Bueller's Friend does. My daddy didn't love me either.
Mm-hmm.
He gets to know Surratt and Signac and Toulouse-lautrec, who I'll be talking about in a bit. But more importantly, he meets Gauguin, who I'll also be talking about him. That guy is a degenerate if there ever was one. And he becomes friends with Pissarro, the Jew boy from the Caribbean who is a wholesaler on the side, because everybody knows this guy.
The textile wholesaler.
All roads seem to go through this Pizarro guy. Like, it's not just that there's like 30 people who all fit in a room. It's that this guy is just the spoke of the wheel. Van Gogh produces all sorts of weird shit between 1886 and 1888, but that's just indicative of his style. There's this guy here named Julien Tanguy. That's Julien Tanguy. I'm sorry to any French people who are listening, but I'm not going to butcher your language anymore. It's not my fault half your words are silent.
Yeah.
Julian Tanguy.
They'll be speaking Arabic pretty soon, don't worry.
Yeah.
Just learn Arabic.
I know.
Yeah.
If you move to Italy, you need to learn Italian. If you move to Norway, you need to learn Norwegian. If you move to France, you need to learn Arabic.
You want to get a good shawarma or not?
So, who is this guy? He is the guy who owns the paint shop where all the artists buy their bright paints. So, again, we're making the comparison that this is like New York in the 90s. Like, if this is like on Friends where they all meet at the coffee shop, or Melrose Place where they all meet at the pool. Everybody meets at this guy's paint shop.
He's the one guy with the new colors.
Yes.
Okay. It's a bottleneck.
Yep. So between 1886 and 1887, Van Gogh paints this guy 3 times. This is the first painting. It almost seems like more of a serious painting, though you do see his like cross-hatching style that he clearly got from the little dots.
Yeah, it looks like there's motion. Yeah. It makes me, it looks like it's, if it was moving, that would make sense to my eyes.
Here's the second painting. Now you can.
Quaker Oats.
Now you can say this is more expressive. You still have the cross hatching there.
And the weeb stuff.
Well, exactly. And say, there's 2 geisha paint. Actually, there's 3 geisha paintings there.
Yeah, one of the maybe the bottom one might be a samurai. I don't know. I think one geisha. I don't know.
Or maybe it's kabuki. I don't know. The third one.
Van Gogh doesn't know.
Well, here's where he almost goes full weeb. Here's his 3rd painting before he leaves Paris. There's not just a bunch of like Mikado paintings. There's the painting of Mount Fuji in the background as well.
He would have loved Akira.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Van Gogh was not the only one of these people who liked who liked the Japanese stuff. But I just want to say, like, was this guy some tortured Dutch artist who saw things like nobody else? No, he was a fucking weeb who would have been into anime today.
Yeah. Trump's kid.
So 1888, he, for one reason or another, decides to leave Paris and move to Provence.
Well, he kept marrying prostitutes. That's the problem. He kept letting prostitutes move in, and his brother had to keep coming and being like, "Get out of here, you freaking prostitute." I don't know if any of you guys ever had to evict a prostitute, but it's not pleasant business. So eventually he's moved to like a care home. His brother pays a doctor to look after him, basically.
I give you access to my vagina and you don't give me access to your house.
Pretty much. And he just moved right in.
And like vampires.
Like, yeah, you got to invite him in once they're there.
So 1888, he moves to the south of France. He moves to Provence and decides he wants to escape Paris and start a painting commune.
Well, that's healthy. This is a balanced psyche that we're dealing with.
Now, he wants to start this commune in the south of France. There's only one problem, is that nobody leaves Paris. Because, like I said, as much as these people love to condemn the bourgeoisie, who the fuck are they selling to?
Yeah, you gotta have some money to buy art.
So he moves to the south of France. He has a very productive time. He makes something like 200 paintings in 15 months. But again, we have the letters between him and his brother, and he's really starting to lose his marbles at this point. But this is the stuff he's doing. This is the Langlois Bridge at Arles with women washing in 1888. Uh, South of France is a bright place, and I guess this is just representative of the stuff he's doing. This is probably not the most realistic color palette. Like the water's not that color. The people aren't that. The people don't look like that either. But I think it gets the point across of what this South of France looks like. So this is in the business what they call being expressive. Saying, the Impressionists were people who said, okay, I'm just going to get my easel, set it up in the park, and paint what I see. Maybe it's not going to be the most realistic thing ever, the most detailed thing ever, but I'm still going to get the essence of it across. Expressionism is where you say, you know what, I'm going to still get the idea across, but I'm going to do it by using like unrealistic colors. And because the unrealistic colors almost get the essence of it better than the realistic ones do.
Okay.
And also, what does he do here? Just in case there is any doubt that if he were alive today, he'd be drawing anime girls with lopsided tits. Is there any doubt?
It's like a t-shirt.
Yeah. But it also looks like that could be a frame in a manga.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be a background.
It's called Boats on the Beach. But yeah, this, just to be very, very clear, just like when we did our Hitler episode, we wanted to make it clear this guy was a theater kid. Yeah. Vincent Van Gogh was a weeb.
Yep.
He would be cosplaying at the anime convention.
That's how far back these tropes go.
Here's the house that Vincent moves into. It's called the Yellow House. And again, this is where you really start to see him stop caring about realism, because the house isn't going to be that brightly lit at night, but who cares? This is the house that he wants to turn into his artist commune. He's renting it for I don't know how much. I'm not sure if he's supporting. Actually, no, he's not selling any paintings, so his brother must be supporting him here.
Oh, his brother supported him his whole life, basically, from my understanding.
So the other thing that we all know about is he paints a bunch of sunflowers. That's he paints sunflowers at all points in the life cycle: young flowers, mature sunflowers, dying sunflowers, everything. And again, it's very bright, and maybe you can say he's a trailblazer by, making these bright, vibrant sunflowers. But again, just before this, they just didn't have like 7 different shades of yellow from the paint store.
This was a technological advance. This was a materials advance.
Yeah,
this wasn't an artistic advance.
Why were we not doing this podcast in 1997? Because
nobody would have downloaded it. It would have taken 50 hours to download a 5-minute part.
On their iPod. Oh yeah, that hadn't been invented yet either. Yeah. His brother is starting to worry about his mental health, so he convinces Paul Gauguin, who we'll be looking at very shortly. He convinces Paul Gauguin to go live with him, and Gauguin's just a piece of shit who has a wife and kids and says, you know what, fuck my responsibilities, I'm going to be an avant-garde painter. And he's like 36 at this point.
Just saying, in the industry, you're on the wrong side of 25.
Yeah. Oh, Gauguin. Well, we will look at what happens when you get into creative endeavor on the wrong side of 25 when we look at this guy.
Never pretty.
Gauguin does have enough money to fuck off to the south of France for a little bit, so he moves down, and Vincent says, we're living like we're the early Christians, which means Van Gogh's lazy.
He's a dirty communist.
Yep. He wants to start an artist commune. So yeah.
That's one thing I never hear is like you think the Yankees in the States would be because they're in Acts, they're living in they're all the Christian communes.
Okay, we will talk about that when we do an episode about the Second Great Awakening, because that's all of that shit. The Mormons, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Shakers, the early feminists, the Oneidas, They all start these utopian compounds. There's like 100 of them across the United States. And in some of them, they're doing things like men want to live as women and women want to live as men. So just in case anybody thinks transgenderism is something new and edgy, it was done in the 1850s. In this episode, we're talking about how all this hipster shit comes from the 1880s. Transgenderism comes from the 1850s.
In ancient Rome, there was a cult, and the priests would show their devotion to this goddess by castrating themselves and dressing as women.
Yeah.
So this goes back a long way.
Do whatever you want to do. I'm just saying you're not edgy. You're not blazing a trail by saying maybe a man can be a woman if he recites the right incantation.
It's just David Bowie was being David Bowie in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can be David Bowie, you can be whatever you want. But we can't pretend that David Bowie didn't do that 50 years ago at this point. Like my elderly parents were shocked by David Bowie.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? David Bowie was just ripping off the Dada movement, who we'll also get to shortly.
Oh, excellent.
So Gauguin moves down to the south of France, and while Gauguin's there, Van Gogh starts doing some paintings about the nightlife. Like this one is supposed to get the seedy feel of a dive bar.
Yeah,
this
looks like I'm going into work.
Yeah.
In my late 20s.
Again, the color palette's not realistic. It doesn't need to be that. Like if that reminds you of the essence of a dive bar, he's done something right.
Yeah, kind of grimy, dirty spray. Hits you in the face.
To be very, very clear, I would much prefer if art was still the academic paintings of the gladiators and the paintings of the images from literature. I am not trying to say that there's no value to this at all. Just to be very clear.
So we could maybe use this as a thumbnail.
Yeah, why not?
for some of the bouncing stuff.
Yeah. This is the Cafe Terrace at night.
Oh, this is the one I'm freaking everywhere.
Also, just look at the sky. You know exactly where I'm going with this. This is his first attempt at a night scene before he goes completely insane. Notice how the lines aren't all swirly and crooked here because he hasn't been committed to a mental asylum yet. But again, does it matter that nothing actually looks like this? That those guys almost look like they're walking on water? No, he gets the feel of a starry night in the south of France across.
It's like I'm going out fishing.
Yep. So, what always happens when you get two eccentric creatives living in the same place?
Sodomy?
Not that.
Conflict.
Yes.
There we go.
It's only a matter of time before they get in a big fight, and at some point in December of 1888, they get in a huge altercation. Gauguin fucks off and leaves. And Vincent cuts off a chunk of his ear, and nobody knows exactly what the story is there.
Now, it's apropos at this point. I worked a lot of bohemian venues in my time in Toronto. Anyone who thinks like, oh, I would have been, I would have understood these people, you've never dealt with these, there's no shortage of mentally ill creatives.
Yeah.
And they're really very hard to deal with, and they're a danger to themselves and others. Yeah. And there's a objective reality of a mentally ill person who's hurting themselves and the people around them. And then there's the romantic image of this tortured artist.
Again, I want to make it clear, it's not just that Vincent is a weeb. These people are all weebs. Every time you read about these Montmartre artists, at some point you read some academic treatise that is written by a professor who loves the smell of his own farts. And so was affected by the Japanese paintings that he saw. Every fucking one of them.
They were all very weeb. You think I wish they'd lived to see frickin' StarCraft and, Astro Boy and some of them. They would have loved that.
Now again, I don't know if I see a tortured genius so much as an emo kid. Like he does a portrait with a bandage, and he still has to have a Japanese painting in the background. This is the specific Japanese painting that he had to do in a painting of himself with a bandage on his ear.
So we had the equivalent of anime posters.
Yeah, and the equivalent of attention cutting.
Yeah. And then this would be the equivalent of like posting about it on social media, I guess.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. With an anime avatar. Yeah, folks, I all my life I've had to listen to the black turtleneck crowd tell me that I just don't understand these people's genius. Now I've had to spend months researching this stuff. No, this guy is just, we would have had a live channel.
Oh, I've had to get this loser out of the bar. This is fucking, they can't pay their bill, they act up.
So now here's where he goes full emo. This painting is called The Sower, like a guy sowing the seeds.
Jesus. This is very, how could this happen to me?
I hate my mom. I hate my dad.
I flunked my math test, now I'm sad.
Yeah, this, if he had been musically inclined instead of artistic, or instead of visually inclined, maybe he would have been Green Day. I don't know.
I got to apologize to my fishing guide. He's a big Green Day fan. He does guiding for Green Day when they're up in Muskoka, because rich people go to Muskoka. And I was like, I called them like pop rock, and he was clearly like hurt. And I wasn't meaning to hurt the guy. I have a lot of respect for him. But fucking Fat Joe from NoFX was like, you know, they've always kind of played their style of music, and it's not their fault they got famous. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe you're right, Fat Joe. Maybe I can appreciate Basket Case now. In my 40s, I don't have to worry about that being too popular.
Well, Vincent is the guy who is a Basket Case, and he says, do you have the time to listen to me whine? Because this is when...
He went to a whore.
Yeah, yes he did. So yeah, this is when the neighbors petitioned to have him committed, because...
Because again, the reality of an ill person
is
very different.
Yeah, I'm sure the real estate value of the Yellow House is big now that it's a historical site, but back then...
No, that's just not, no one wants to live next to this guy.
So yeah, he goes to the hospital at San Remy, the mental hospital. He's committed. And this is kind of like when Kanye West decides to enter into a bit of a spiral, but he's still making music that's well received.
Yeah.
Or when Britney Spears shaves her head, but, you know, she's at least still selling albums.
Yeah.
Not that Vincent's selling anything, but he's still going to produce stuff. He's still going to produce stuff that modern art people love. And also, I mean, I almost wonder, part of the appeal of Britney Spears is you wanted to see just how much of a train wreck she was. I almost wonder if that's what the modern fascination with Vincent is.
Yeah, I think people relate to train wrecks.
Yeah.
I think it always makes you like, why do I like watching Trailer Park Boys? Like, at the end of the day, it makes you feel better.
Yeah. So, within a span of 12 months, when Vincent is locked up at the mental institution, he makes 200 paintings.
Jesus.
So, you know, again, he's a guy who failed at everything till he was 30, then said, fuck it, I'm going to be a painter and throw all my energy at it. Never once asking, am I going to be able to support myself?
No, he didn't get into politics.
Yeah. Yeah, can you imagine?
Some failed painter getting, oh God.
So, here's some of the things he does. This is the mulberry tree. Now, this is very typical of the stuff he does when he's in the mental institution, because the lines aren't straight. They're now going to be crooked all over the place.
I'm not seeing any mulberries.
No, but
Not.
If you want to go impress people at the museum when you go into the Van Gogh exhibit, you say, I can tell that he did this when he was locked up. How did he know? Because the lines aren't straight anymore.
Oh, okay.
The cornfield with the crows. Yeah, this is something you make when you're locked up.
Yeah. Yeah, homie was not, didn't have a lot of,
There's even a song in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat about the crows circling overhead. It's
I was just humming that the other day. It's funny you bring that up.
Then, of course, you know, the one we have to bring up, Starry Night. This is done while he's institutionalized. But again, this is not his first crack at this subject matter. We already did one Starry Night painting, but that one had all the lines straight. This one has swirls, and not just in the sky, like whatever the fuck that tree or building or whatever it is supposed to be.
Shout out to all the damaged women that love this because of Doctor Who.
I don't know what's going on in his head, but it manifests itself by all his lines becoming crooked. So
maybe there's some neurobiology to be learned here, but
again, is he an underappreciated genius, or do we just enjoy the spectacle of a guy going insane? I don't know.
Yes, yeah. We're a sadistic bunch.
Even when he does more traditional subject matter, this is the church at Auvers. Again, the lines are all crooked here, and it's not just the path going up to it's crooked. Like the roof is crooked. This is very one of those things. So I'm sure. I think he was still writing letters to his brother at this point, so maybe you can get some clues as to what's going on in his head. But I'm guessing that the nurse who was watching him wouldn't give him anything sharp after he cut his ear off. So whatever mental anguish he was going through just came out with him not making straight lines anymore.
Yeah, they took away his scissors or whatever.
And again, I've had to read enough of these art history books which just romanticize this guy. This is when they start talking about him having awareness of paint. I think read as much into that as you want to. This is just a guy going nuts.
This is no different from a modern freak show in some ways.
So the next year, 1890, he actually does sell one painting, so good on him. He gets released by Dr. Gachet, who is a friend of Pizarro. Again, this guy, everybody fucking knows this guy. So he gets released, he moves in with this doctor, but shortly after he kills himself. And he does it by shooting himself in the midsection.
And he doesn't die right away.
No, he spends a day dying. Vincent.
No, Dad.
Some things you want to do with straight lines, that's...
Yeah. I think a painter, this is why painters need to study anatomy.
So, we've got Cezanne, the crotchety old guy who plays with the angles. We've got Van Gogh, the train wreck, who uses bright colors, whether or not they're realistic. To round out the triumvirate, we have to talk about Paul Gauguin, the lecherous deadbeat.
There we go. There's a trope of artists.
Now, I think every bohemian out there, whether they will admit it or not, uses Gauguin as the inspiration for their emo monologues about escaping the modern world. Because the guy said, fuck my responsibilities to my wife and kids. He fucked off to Tahiti, when literally every other artist with a political axe to grind about the bourgeois modern world stayed in Paris and kept sucking off the people who were their potential patrons. This guy just said, fuck this, I'm going to Tahiti.
Fuck it. Going somewhere warm to complain.
So, rewinding a bit, Gauguin takes a job as a stockbroker. He marries a Danish woman from a respectable family and lives a quiet, bougie life, taking up painting as a hobby. And of course, who's he going to meet? He's going to meet Pizarro as well.
There we go.
Again, it's good to know Kramer. If you're trying to be some sort of hustler in New York in the 90s, it's good to know Kramer. Unless you're Jerry.
Yeah.
So he meets Pizarro, and Gauguin actually has a job, so he's able to be a patron too, so he actually buys a bunch of the Impressionists' works. And when you're the customer and patron of these people, it's an easy sell to say, hey, I'm a bit of an amateur artist, can I get into your Impressionist shows too? Again, don't hate the player, hate the game. I'm talking about these Montmartre artists. I just need to make it clear. It's not always about talent. It's often about hustle.
Yeah, luck and who you know.
So when the stock market crashes in 1882, he's, I think, 35 or 36, and he says, fuck it, I'm going to be a painter. And he thinks his respectable Danish in-laws are going to support him.
Ooh, the Danes are not going to play that.
No.
We aren't paying you a Dane geld.
Yeah, so they tell him, we're not going to support you, if you want to do this. We gave our daughter to you, thinking we were giving her to a stockbroker. Now you want to be a painter? No.
Get a job, you bum. Do what your parents did, Mr. Gauguin. Get a job, sir.
Yeah, so he decides not to get a job. He says, fuck it, I'll leave my wife and kids with their parents in Copenhagen and move back to Paris.
One way or another, you're supporting my family. I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, when he had a job, he had bought up a whole bunch of this art, so he sells off his art collection to support himself. And like all of these guys, when you look at his early work, it's almost normal. You can maybe see this on a Hallmark card.
Yeah, it's like a group of 7 Canadian landscapes too.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to get to the group of 7. After the entire world had decided they were done with the academic style of art, Canada, because we just needed to be more British than the British, because we need people to tell us what to do, we had a bunch of artists who made landscapes in the old British style.
Beautiful, beautiful landscapes of Algonquin Park.
Yep. Oh, beautiful. I'm not saying they weren't beautiful. I'm just saying leave it to Canada to do all this beautiful landscape art in the 1930s when the rest of the world had long since moved on from it.
I've read that Toronto or York had the last powdered wig shop in the entire empire. That was the last place that stopped wearing the wigs. Like, was it? It was just always Toronto was well behind the times in terms of fashion.
Well, again, it's just the nature. Canada was, at least English Canada, was founded by people who wanted a king, the Loyalists.
Yeah.
So whether we need to be more British than the British or more progressive than the American blue staters, we need to prove that we do it better than our overlords.
Yeah.
It's just how things go.
It's deep in the zeitgeist of English Canada.
And if Trump annexes Canada, people will be unhappy for the time being, but 30 years from now, they're going to be more Trumpian than Texas. It's just our national character. We need a role model.
Yeah.
So, like I said, Gauguin starts by doing normal stuff. Then in 1886, he says, you know what? I need to be around primitive people to inspire me. I guess he can't admit to himself that he left his 5 kids unless he thinks he's doing something profound.
Yeah, they're always read a lot of weight into their own stories.
Remember that the dates are important here because he goes to meet Van Gogh in the fall of 1888, and this is 1886. So, he's not exactly an established artist. He's still getting invites to the artist colonies.
Okay.
He decides that he's going to go live in an artist colony in Brittany in the north of France. They're not the Amish, but as far as France in those days goes, if you wanted to live with a primitive group of people, that's where you went. You went up to Brittany.
Okay. It's like the Highlands.
Yeah, kind of. Now, again, the guy's like 40 or 41 at this point. And these artist colonies are like full of 22-year-olds finding themselves while they blow through their trust funds.
Uh-oh, I know this formula. I've worked enough student pubs to know how this works out.
Yeah, me too. Like again, I have traveled, in hostels as the old guy, and look, you're not completely out of place when you're the 37-year-old in the hostel in Thailand traveling by yourself, but you have the aura of a fuck up. I was in Southeast Asia for your wedding. I had perfectly legitimate reasons for being there, but I also understand you're in your mid-30s traveling through Thailand by yourself. I understand how you're going to be viewed.
There's going to be some reasonable assumptions people are going to make, whether they're true or not in your case. Mm-hmm. It only makes sense to make those assumptions.
I don't blame them for raising questions. I would raise the questions too. In fact, if I met another person my own age traveling, I would raise those questions. I don't blame anybody.
This old punk rocker I used to hang out with, he's like telling me, I don't trust people who go to Thailand. I'm like, well, there's lots to do in Thailand. There's beautiful temples, there's culture. Yeah, they might do that, but that's not what they're doing first.
For the record, I spent no time in Bangkok. I got to Bangkok the evening before I left and flew out the next morning, if that helps my case.
Yeah, it does. I can vouch for you.
As they said in the Hangover movie, it's Bangkok, not Bangkok.
Yeah, you freaking behaved yourself perfectly in Malaysia. In the Muslim country where they cut off your head for messing with the local girls, you did great. But that's the one thing. As an expat in Malaysia, you can do anything you want except mess around with the Malay girls. That's the one thing the morality police take very seriously. Other than that, it's like, who cares? So, interesting. I should do a travel guide.
Saying, be long gone before the girl has the baby with blue eyes is what you're telling me.
Yeah, well, there was like signs. I went to get a massage, and there's like signs being like, do not ask us for prostitution services. Like, Malaysia is not, it's an arbitrary line, but culturally, it's very important. It's very different. You'd much rather screw up in Thailand than screw up in Malaysia.
Yeah, Buddhist country versus a Muslim country, yes.
Yeah. And these are the chill Muslims. Anywho, back to these, this group of friends.
So Gauguin, he's the 40-year-old at the artist colony and hangs out with a guy in his early 20s named Emile Bernard.
Oh, there's nothing untoward going on there.
It's actually, I think it's kind of a shame that Bernard is not the famous guy from the time. We pay attention to Van Gogh, the complete train wreck, and Gauguin, the complete lech.
Yep.
I think Bernard is probably a better artist than both of them, and he still does the avant-garde type stuff, but I think he just doesn't have the lore.
You gotta have a good backstory. You gotta sell people.
Let that be a lesson, boys and girls. If you're an avant-garde artist, make sure your life is a complete train wreck.
Yeah, make sure you're an interesting story. What's his face? Leonard Cohen said that if your life is burning properly, art is just the ashes. Mm-hmm. So take that forward.
Yep. With all the drugs on the market, it's never been easier to be authentic.
Yeah. You just go to a doctor to screw yourself up these days. Jesus. Everybody's Elvis.
So Gauguin, because he wants to be important, again, he's in his 40s at this point, he comes up with academic terms for everything he does. And look, I think it's all bullshit, but every art history professor will bring up the terms synthetism and cloisonnism when you're talking about his time in the north of France. When they talk about synthetism, this is what they're talking about.
The lazy Jesus picture?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I'd just call this lazy Jesus.
Yeah, well, this is called the Yellow Christ. And
Jesus Christ.
The painting is actually after his visit to Vincent van Gogh and the altercation that makes him storm out, but it still gets I think it still gets the point across.
Do you think this inspired The Simpsons?
There's a non-zero chance.
There we go.
Yeah, the most important thing about this style of painting is the thick black outlines, because like it's not just that the color of Jesus is not entirely realistic. It it it's not completely hard on the eyes because there's a big black outline around him, so it doesn't bleed over into anything else. What else do we have here? It's because of the black outlines, the Jesus figure is almost separated from everybody else, including these peasant women at the base of it. Well, there's no outlines. I mean, there's small outlines on them, but like they're a little more realistic. They blend into the background, whereas the Jesus form is supposed to stand out, and he uses the black outlines to do that. It's like you stare at the clouds long enough, you start seeing connections because your brain doesn't want to let you think you've been staring at the clouds for 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's a technical term
Like,
for it.
you can tell Vincent van Gogh's sunflower paintings before and after Gauguin visits him because afterwards the sunflowers have black outlines.
Oh, he's picking up a trick of the trade.
And again, like, you can nerd out on this stuff because there's just not many of these people.
It's one sad social group, basically.
Yeah. Yes.
Nerds that weep, nerds that didn't get along in a city.
Yes. Now, I'm sure every group of high school friends from a fine arts high school has their own little internal group of lore. That's all this Montmartre avant-garde lore is. It's just one little group of fuck-ups.
Yep.
Yeah, so subject-wise, again, these are clearly women from Brittany, the French Amish. They're not like the Three Marys from Palestine. The color scheme is also very distinctively the Breton landscape. So, he's trying to make a point by saying that these people are living a primitive holy lifestyle and Jesus is going to appear there before it appears in Paris. Like I said, just as Cézanne played with the angles and Van Gogh played with the color, Gauguin's playing with the form here. I think I said this was synthetism. I think this is Cloisonnism. Oh. When it brings up synthetism, brings up this work here. The vision after the sermon, or Jacob wrestling the angel.
Yeah, we're just talking about.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. I told you might be a little more disappointed by the actual one, and this is considered a pioneering work of art, which is already a problem, I think.
Homie didn't. That's a weird crap.
Yeah. So, why is this painting so important? Again, you have a scene from the Bible, but not set in the Holy Land. It's moved to Brittany. These are pious women, and on the right-hand side you see a priest. They're having a vision after a sermon of Jacob wrestling the angel. And usually when you have a scene showing commoners and biblical figures, you have something to indicate there's a difference between them. Like either there's a halo or more. Usually there's also like some indication that they're coming down from the sky. But just look at the perspective here. This is the ground, and first of all, the ground's a weird color. Yeah. But that's not the sky in the background. It's almost like this is on top of a hill, and you're looking downwards, so you can't even see the sky here.
Yeah.
So it's almost like these biblical figures are reenacting the scene right in front of them, and there's no separation of the biblical figures and these pious people. These pseudo-Amish people, actually, they probably won't respect it. They probably won't appreciate being called that.
The Anabaptists, the Catholics.
I think they're still Catholics, but they're the Catholic Amish. I don't know how else to describe them. It's non-naturalistic, especially with the red color, but that's because it's supposed to be almost something otherworldly. Like the ground's red, but it's because it's not supposed to represent something real.
Yeah, it's part of Buddy's vision there.
Yeah. So he's basically saying that formalism is bullshit and that ideas are more important than technique. Read as much or as little into that as you want. There's a lot of academic theories that read a lot into it, think he's a genius. One of the points I'm trying to make here is you make your own call. If from the perspective of the year of our Lord 2025, if you think this is ugly, you can say it's ugly. I give you permission.
I'm just sad. He had an opportunity to do a beautiful wrestling scene, and he's just this nonsense what they're doing.
So 1888 comes along. Like I said, Van Gogh's brother asks him, can you please go to the south of France and keep my brother some company before he goes completely insane? And like I said, we now know how that went, but at least you get this painting out of it, the painter of sunflowers. So, this is how Van Gogh was at least seen by one other person.
Looks like Elephant Man a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's clear distortion here.
Yeah.
I think I've read a couple of books. I don't know if there is any consensus on how you interpret this, but it's almost like The Scream or something. It's just distorted in a surreal way.
Okay.
You also see the black lines here. So a museum curator will say, like I said, after this visit, that when you look at Van Gogh's paintings, the sunflowers start having the black outlines, like I said. Like I said, the timelines are important. This is the winter of 1888. He has spent 2 years in Brittany because he went to Brittany in 1886. 2 months with this crazy Dutch guy who cuts his ear off. And like a good self-hating bourgeois, he starts thinking he needs something even more primitive than the Amish. But what happens the next year, if you are a bit of a history spurred? What happens in 1889? That's the year that the World's Fair comes to Paris, and that's when they build the Eiffel Tower. And so he goes back to Paris, he attends the World's Fair, and he finds out about the primitive peoples at the far end of the French Empire.
Oh.
Yeah, specifically Tahiti. And he says, after saying fuck this, after saying fuck this, I'm going to leave my wife and kids and go be an artist. It's only a hop, skip, and a jump to fuck this, I'm going to go live in Tahiti with the primitive people.
Hemingway.
Yeah. Talking about the old guy traveling alone in Thailand, this is when Gauguin goes full old guy living alone in Thailand.
I have a passport, ladies.
So he sells 30 paintings, so he's still at least somewhat well connected. He gets enough money to go live in Tahiti for a bit. He sets sail in 1891, gets to Tahiti, says, all right, where are these primitive people? Like, what the fuck? The missionaries already converted them to Christianity.
You missed the boat, buddy. You missed the boat.
Something you might have wanted to read up on before you got on the boat and traveled to the South Pacific, but
Little things.
it's like George W. Bush. What do you mean there are Sunnis and Shias in the Middle East?
Yeah. Oh, God.
We will be doing an episode on that.
Yes, it was as dumb an idea on its face as it bore out to be.
Mm-hmm. Even if you're in the middle of doing a really stupid idea in a remote part of the world, just don't wear a flight suit under a banner that says mission accomplished 2 months into it. That's all.
It was just like read Lawrence of Arabia just before you. This
just like when he went to Brittany, he painted biblical scenes with the pious locals. I guess all he can do now in Tahiti is do the same thing. So this is called Hail Mary. It's like the vision of Mary and Child, but appearing in Tahiti instead of in Brittany. All right, good on you, buddy.
way to go. You got something out of the trip.
Even though they're Christians in the South Pacific, they still do have some primitive beliefs, like they believe in ghosts and apparitions. So paints this of a sick woman who thinks she sees a ghost in her bedroom. Now, the obvious question, he's getting a black woman to pose native for him.
Yeah, That's red flags.
Well,
going off.
just because I know what the next question is going to be, yes, she's his 13-year-old quote-unquote wife. He still is married to the woman in Denmark, but...
at least he's got a 13-year-old native girl.
Her name is Teha Amana. Now, here's the thing about Tahiti. There just aren't a lot of art patrons in Tahiti.
Yeah.
Which is why all of his colleagues stayed in Paris.
Yep.
And his health is starting to deteriorate. Why? Because at some point in this ordeal, it's not clear if it was before he got on the boat or after he got on the boat, but he has syphilis.
There we go.
So he goes back to Paris and, you know, expects to be treated as this hipster who really lived the dream and really went to the ends of the earth to live with the primitive people.
Like that fucking kid who took the bus to Alaska or lived in a bus in Alaska.
I thought you were going to say Grizzly Man, but same thing.
Yeah. Comes up again and again.
If you're under 30, do yourself a favor and watch Grizzly Man. If you've ever wondered, are people really this stupid? Yes, they really are this stupid.
Yeah.
You just have to accept that some people are this stupid in this world.
We should do Timothy Treadwell at some point. That's kind of interesting.
So, one of my ex-girlfriends was a PhD student in ecology, and she did her field work up in Alaska on some fish species up there. And her pilot was the guy who shot the bear that ate Treadwell.
It's a small world up there.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So Gauguin gets back to Paris. He says, okay, I made all this art in the South Seas. People are going to see me as an exotic genius. He still has his connections through the Impressionists. Remember, that's who he got involved with when he started his midlife crisis, because that's what it was, a midlife crisis. So he gets in touch with Paul Durand-Ruel, who was the Impressionist's big art dealer. And he's, again, I know I've said it like 3 times, he was the guy who sold all the Impressionists' paintings in America. And Durand-Ruel gives him a show. So he exhibits all of this art about these primitive natives of the South Pacific. And like nobody buys it.
The market is a harsh mistress.
Mm-hmm. Things may be different now in Paris, but in Paris in the 1890s, nobody really wants weird paintings of naked black women.
Yeah, you can see that being a hard sell.
He is occasionally able to sell a work or two, but he's just now a figure in Paris who is... He's respected for his devotion to the craft, but now everybody knows he doesn't have an audience, and that's not a good place to be when you're like 46 or however old he is when he gets back to Paris.
It doesn't leave you in a good position to bargain for your pieces either.
Also, at some point in the South Pacific, he caught the jungle fever and gets into a relationship with a teenager named Anna the Javanese in Paris.
A very diverse city.
He paints a nude of her called The Child Woman Judith Is Not Yet Breached.
Jesus Christ. The Michael Jackson level.
Yes, it is. Or at least a Diddy level.
Yeah.
He also decides to start walking around with a blue coat, a fez, his teenage Javanese mistress, and her pet monkey. So it's Elvis and it's Michael Jackson in one. Again, none of these people are original. All done before the year 1900. All of it.
First rock stars.
So one day in 1894, him and his young paramour go on a trip, and Gauguin decides to shoot off his mouth with a group of sailors, and they kick the shit out of him.
Yeah, that'll happen.
He breaks his ankle in the ordeal, so he has to spend some time recovering. Actually, for the rest of his life, he's going to have a fucked up leg because of it. But while he's getting back on his feet, he tells Anna the Javanese, just go back to Paris, wait for me, I just need a couple weeks to recover here. He gets back to Paris, She has disappeared and his studio's been robbed.
Yeah.
What have we learned here? Now, again, because everything is viewed through the modern academic lens, they're like, yeah, this was a misogynistic man and his wife decided to assert her independence. No, you date a 14-year-old named Anna the Javanese, you're getting robbed.
Yeah, this is just regular prostitute stuff. I don't know what you've had a more charmed experience in life. Congratulations, but this is the kind of thing that happens when. This is why they wouldn't let Van Gogh just live with the prostitute. Why is this shit like this?
Yeah. Well, at least Van Gogh killed himself when he was 37 before he became a sad old guy. Gauguin is like 45 or 46 at this point, and now we are dealing with a very unreliable narrator because nobody's buying his art. His exotic mistress has robbed him, and he's still walking around with a fez.
Jesus Christ. The fez is the last thing to go.
Believe him, don't believe him when he tells you his official story. But for one reason or another, he decides to go back to Tahiti, saying in a letter that I want to go back to my savages.
All right, it's not PC, but oh well.
I'm not PC.
No.
So he gets back to Tahiti. He still has syphilis. His leg is still fucked up from fighting the sailors. And also on top of it, now he's a full-on alcoholic.
Yeah, that's hitting for the trifecta.
So he runs out of money.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm sure he's wishing that he had stuck with his career as a stockbroker.
Yep.
He takes a clerical job, but he feels humiliated doing it because how far the mighty have fallen. Mm-hmm. It's like these days he'd be a Walmart greeter or something. Yeah. In 1897, he gets a letter saying one of his kids died of pneumonia, and he decides to do one more painting because he's apparently just grieved about it. Dude, you left your wife and kids in Denmark. Yeah. I don't know how grieved you are at this, but anyways, he says, I'm going to do just one more painting just for myself. I don't even need to sell this, and I'm going to kill myself afterwards. And this is what he creates. It's an enigmatic painting. It's called Where Do We Come From? Where Are We? Where Are We Going? We're in France. D'où venons-nous? Qu'est sommes-nous? Où allons-nous? Why am I even trying to speak French at this point? There's a lot of debate into what this painting is supposed to mean. Obviously, it's full of symbolism. There's Adam picking the apple in the middle, and then, as you look from right to left, you see a baby being born, and then an old man on the far left. So
probably this is just all the people he gave syphilis to.
Yeah, possibly. It's, he's in true artistic fashion. He paints this really overly dramatic but enigmatic painting that people are supposed to read into. He then finishes it, signs it, says it's time to kill himself, and he vomits up the poison.
Yeah.
And he decides he doesn't really want to go through with that.
Fucking pussy.
So he sends a letter to one of his patrons in Paris, Daniel de Montfried. And Montfried's response is, your place is there among the savages. Your art is too great to be dragged through the mire in Paris. That's like, dude, stay the fuck away. When you gone, you stay gone.
I can't.
I
can't sell your crap. Please don't.
But his friend in Paris, he does agree to send him a stipend to survive in.
Keep him the hell away.
He's probably glad he didn't spend too much time ripping on the capitalist bourgeoisie at this point.
They come in handy sometimes.
So Gauguin ships this painting back, and one other thing I should say about this painting, because he's so poor at this point, is not on canvas, it's on burlap.
Wow.
So Gauguin ships this painting back with specific instructions, and at some point this painting does end up in Villard's gallery. Again, the guy who runs the equivalent of CBGB, so, good on him.
Way to go. It's a good gig.
He does make a couple more paintings, but he eventually decides to move from Tahiti to a place that's even farther afield into the Marquesas Islands, and he dies a few years later.
I already gave all these people syphilis. On to the next island.
Yeah. So we've gone through the three big Montmartre artists, Cezanne, Van Gogh, Gauguin. Just one more person we need to talk about who is, surprise, surprise, also a complete degenerate. That's Henri Toulouse-lautrec.
Oh, I like midgets. This is weird that I do not like this guy.
Well, we don't know exactly what happened, but he had some sort of disorder that caused his legs to stop growing after he fractures them growing up. There is something called Toulouse-lautrec syndrome now, which is what they believe he had, but they're not actually sure.
Dig him up, figure it out.
So Toulouse-lautrec was an aristocrat, so he doesn't have some weird story of ending up in Paris. His parents support his artistic career, and draftsmanship runs in his family, so he goes to the academies. He decides he doesn't want to be an academic painter and ends up being a degenerate in Montmartre because he can. He likes Edgar Degas, the impressionist who painted all the ballet dancers in the studio, so again, draw your own conclusions there.
Appreciates the male form, the female form.
But, I keep bringing up the fact that the Industrial Revolution is still going on in the 1890s, and in particular, a new technique is being discovered for color lithography, which is like poster making. And it just like photography becomes an academic endeavor, lithography or poster making becomes a creative endeavor in the 1890s as well. And that's what Toulouse-lautrec turns out to be really, really good at, is making posters. Every kid who likes to draw ends up as a hipster in a big city making posters. We haven't moved on.
Yep. It's just their level.
You talk about art as being constantly creating something new, moving culture forward. We ain't moved culture forward since the turn of the century, and I don't mean the year 2000, I mean the year 1900.
We are stuck.
So Toulouse-lautrec is from a family of aristocrats, and he's going to be the guy who does posters for cabarets. He's called the illustrator of the Belle Époque, the Belle Époque, the beautiful era, which is the 1880s, 1890s in Paris. So he paints a lot of cabaret dancers, probably because that's his favorite subject. He does exhibit in some of the prestigious shows, because remember, he's an aristocrat. He gets into a couple of the salons in 1888 and 1890, but in 1889, that's when the Moulin Rouge opens, and he's going to be a regular who likes his women and his strong liquor.
There we go.
In 1891, he does this poster for a cabaret called La Goulue, or The Glutton. And again, this is just every freaking middle-class bohemian since the 1890s has just been making some variant of this poster.
Yeah.
It's the design, the color, the abstract forms. There's just nothing new since this point. He did work hard and play hard. He was a degenerate, but he was a high-functioning degenerate.
That's my favorite kind.
Yeah, he did things like using a toothbrush to make speckling on the posters. So he was devoted, and he made sure to do good work, but he would also often show up to the printers wearing his clothes from the night before.
The type.
So this is Vice magazine. Gavin talks about just being on a coke-fueled binge when they had a deadline looming to get the next issue out. That's Toulouse-lautrec. He becomes what's called the documenter of Montmartre, but he's rich. He's not some bum. He collects art as well, and he's another one of these weebs who collects Japanese prints, because they all do. Then after doing some work and collecting his art and his Japanese prints, what happens? He becomes an alcoholic syphilitic and decides to spend a bunch of his time at brothels. But you know what? Even these years are fruitful because he moves into a room at a brothel and has access to the women of ill repute as they're doing their hair or sitting around between clientele showing up.
As a hooker, now I'm worried. The guy that wants to pay me when I'm just doing normal horse stuff.
Especially the midget.
Yeah.
But one way or another, he moves into a brothel and gets some very candid paintings of hookers. So good on you, buddy. When he was talking about these paintings, he said they were true but not ideal. All right, he was the guy who got the truth behind brothel life.
I know I've never worked in a brothel, but I have worked in a strip club. And it's the most depressing, miserable environment you'll ever be involved in. Your primary job as a doorman isn't to keep the customers in line, it's to break up fights between the entertainers. And it's just, it becomes monotonous and miserable very quickly. And so I can't imagine wanting to move into a whorehouse. Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, this guy drinks himself to death at age 36, so I'm not going to pretend he lived a happy life. He lived fast and died young. He was like if Chris Farley were a midget instead of a fat guy.
Fat midget.
So, he dies age 36 in 1901, so this brings us from the 1890s to the turn of the century. And again, this is similar to going from the 2000s to the 2010s. The hipster energy just disappears. It disappears all of a sudden.
Oof.
One
day you're avant-garde, the next day you're freaking cliche.
Yep. And that's kind of what's going to happen here. There still is going to be some avant-garde art, but it just doesn't have the je ne sais quoi of the first. It doesn't have the je ne sais quoi of the first 10 years in Brooklyn or the first 10 years in Montmartre.
Doesn't have the punch.
So now we get to the turn of the century, and if you listen to any documentary on art history, they make it sound like everything changes, le fin de siècle. In the 1890s, you have Vincent van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne, modernish, but it still looks like something real. But in the 1900s, you have this.
The yachts are always fun.
Yeah, that they are. This is by Andre Derain. This is something called Fauvism. Fauvism is with the weird, trippy colors, and it's the first real avant-garde movement of the 20th century. So I think this has gone on long enough. This is a good breaking point because it's right at the turn of the century. We'll break this apart into 2 episodes. So tune in next time as we talk about what art starts to turn into in the 20th century. See you next time, guys, and to be continued.
All right, you know the drill. Like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us at kofi.com/Radio Free History or at subscribestar.com/radio-free-history.